If they supply F-16s, and they are talking about this and are apparently training pilots, this will not change the situation on the battlefield. Those were the words of Russian President Vladimir Putin when speaking to his country's Air Force pilots about the possibility of Russia ending up at war with NATO in March 2024. The remarks were followed by the chest-puffing that's typical of Putin as he told the assembled pilots that Russia would destroy any F-16s that entered Ukraine, just as we destroy today tanks, armored vehicles, and other equipment, including multiple rocket launchers. These confident words from a man who's facing up to the seeming fact that Ukraine will be finally receiving F-16s, thanks to the efforts of a coalition of countries, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands being among them. These are the jets that Ukraine has sought for many months, as the country is increasingly battered by glide bombs launched by Russian fighters from behind the front lines, and their entry into the war will give Ukraine more options in the aerial fight. What does that mean for Putin? Despite his confidence in public, Putin dreads the arrival of F-16s on the Ukrainian battleground. In this video, we're going to explain why. But before we do, it's worth digging into the drama that surrounded the introduction of what may be the United States' most famous jet. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has made no secret of his desire to get his hands on F-16s. From the early days of the invasion, Zelensky has pleaded with his Western supporters to deliver the jets to his country, not least because their versatility makes them an excellent counter to almost any jet that Russia could use in the fight. It also helps that the F-16 will be a massive upgrade on the Soviet-era Su jets that Ukraine has been forced to use so far. Those pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. The United States represented the biggest hurdle to getting the jets into Ukraine. Though other countries were willing to provide their F-16s, as well as the training that Ukrainian pilots needed to use them, the US was wary of allowing them into the conflict. It was worried that doing so would create additional tensions with Russia, potentially leading to the war stretching beyond Ukraine's borders. Plus, the US argued the sheer amount of training required to pilot the jets would be so difficult and time-consuming that it could distract away from what Ukraine needs to focus on in its fight. America held that position until the summer of 2023. Finally, Washington gave the go-ahead for Denmark and the Netherlands to send F-16s into Ukraine, assuring both that the US would expedite any transfer or approval requests either country made to send the jets in. But there was a catch. The pilots who'd fly the jets needed to be trained before they could be sent over. After all, an F-16 can cost anywhere between $25 and $70 million, depending on the variant. And that's not to mention the military technology that goes into making one. A poorly trained pilot might crash or be shot down out of the sky easier than they should be, leading to the loss of tens of millions of dollars. Plus, Russia might learn more than the US wants from its downed fighter jets. Even so, it was a huge move, with Reuters reporting that a coalition of 11 countries agreed to train Ukrainian pilots after the US gave the go-ahead. That coalition grew to 14 soon after, showcasing the level of support Ukraine has in its fight against Russia. It also means Ukraine could get its hands on powerful jets. The Netherlands alone had 24 F-16s that it was looking to phase out by mid-2024 that it could send to Ukraine, along with a further 18 for sale that Ukraine may be able to buy. But there's a problem. The US appears to have been right on the money when it said that training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16s would be a long and complicated process. According to Air and Space Forces magazine, senior Pentagon officials believe that Ukraine's Air Force will only achieve initial operating capability with the F-16s at the end of 2024, meaning Russia has nothing to fear from them yet. If that's the case, then why does Putin dread the F-16s so much? Part of it comes down to the approval of their use in the Ukraine war being a sign that the US and its NATO allies are hardening their stance on Russia's invasion. For the first year of the war, NATO nations sent money and military aid, but often stopped short of sending the powerful weapons Zelensky believed he needed to take on Russia. That attitude appears to be changing. Washington's approval for sending F-16s into Ukraine is a sign that it's taking the Russian threat in Europe more seriously than it had earlier in the war. That feeling was intensified in April 2024, when the US finally approved a crucial aid bill that will lead to Ukraine receiving $61 billion in military funding to help it fight against Russia. It's likely that this aid, coupled with further packages coming from countries like Britain and the Baltic Sea states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, will be enough for Ukraine to maintain a strong defense throughout 2024. Just long enough for it to finally be able to unleash F-16s on the battlefield. It's also telling that the 4 countries that are going to provide Ukraine with their F-16s, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands, are all members of NATO. The same goes for most of the members of the now 14-strong coalition that's currently training Ukrainian pilots. Putin has referenced this several times. In the same speech he delivered to his pilots about shooting down any F-16s these countries send to Ukraine in Ukraine itself, he also appeared to do a little damage control in terms of what that would mean to the NATO countries supplying those planes. "We have no aggressive intentions towards these states," he said, going on to claim that the idea that Russia would attack another country was just drivel. But Europe is starting to take Putin's actions more seriously. Nowhere is that better displayed than in French President Emmanuel Macron's February 2024 comments that the possibility of NATO troops entering Ukraine couldn't be ruled out. The rest of NATO was quick to backpedal on that claim, with almost all of the major members saying it wasn't a possibility. But Macron doubled down when speaking to The Economist a couple of months later, telling the news outlet that he wasn't ruling anything out. "We have undoubtedly been too hesitant by defining the limits of our action to someone who no longer has any and who is the aggressor," he said when talking about Putin in that article. That's the sort of talk that Putin doesn't want to hear. And though he will be buoyed by the fact that most other NATO leaders are quick to distance themselves from Macron's comments, there's still going to be that seed of doubt in his mind. Could NATO enter the war in Ukraine? If it did, that would pit Russia against major European powers, including France, Britain, and Germany, as well as force it to face the United States. Perhaps Putin doesn't just fear the entry of F-16s into Ukraine, he may also fear what they represent. The rest of Europe, as well as the United States, waking up to his ambitions for the continent and becoming even more willing to stand against him. Putin's comments about not attacking other countries, and certainly not NATO members, are seen in a new light in this context. It's why he's been so careful to point out that any F-16s sent to Ukraine will be shot down in Ukraine. Putin doesn't want to spark a wider war. And he certainly doesn't want a host of countries that have stronger militaries than Ukraine to pay more attention to what he's doing. Now let's switch focus from what the F-16s and the increasing cooperation of a coalition of countries that are sending those planes and training pilots could mean for Putin's war, and toward what the F-16 brings to the battlefield. It would be a massive upgrade on the jets that Ukraine currently has available. At the beginning of the war, Ukraine's aerial arsenal mostly consisted of outdated Soviet planes. Politico said that it had 71 Su-27 and MiG-29 fighters, along with 31 Su-25 attack aircraft and a small fleet of Su-24M bombers. All capable planes, but all Russian-made and understood, as well as being a few generations behind the planes and jets that Russia was able to bring to the battlefield. And though Ukraine has done a good job of defending itself from Russia's attempts to establish aerial dominance, that stock of older planes is being whittled down. Politico reported that it had just 78 combat-capable aircraft in 2024. The F-16 is faster and more versatile than these jets, meaning Ukraine will be able to use it to conduct operations that it couldn't before. Operations such as those involving AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles, or HARMs. The United States has provided Ukraine with these missiles since August 2022, with their supersonic speeds and HE fragmentation warheads making them dangerous precision missiles to use against Putin's forces. The problem for Ukraine is that they haven't been able to get the most out of their HARMs. The missiles were made for use with the F-16CJ, while Ukraine has been forced to deploy them from old Soviet jets for which they were never designed. National Interest points out that this means the utility of Ukraine's HARMs has been dramatically limited. That's because HARMs work by identifying the electromagnetic radiation that radar arrays broadcast, using that radiation for their targeting purposes. Ukraine's problem so far is that its outdated jets haven't been capable of properly operating in contested or Russian-controlled airspace, because Russia's planes could shoot them out of the sky. With F-16s in their arsenal, Ukraine could enter contested airspace using planes designed to utilize HARMs. That would spell bad news for Russia's air defense equipment, such as its own jets, which instantly become targets for HARMs as soon as they power up and start transmitting radar waves. Right now, Ukraine's fighters can only use HARMs in what National Interest called a pre-briefed mode. In other words, the missile is programmed to reach a specific target area before being fired from a long distance by one of Ukraine's fighters. The issue here is that firing from long distances gives Russia a chance to spot the missiles before they arrive, allowing them to power down the radar-sending targets the missiles are supposed to destroy. That won't be a possibility if Ukraine can use F-16s to get in close. When that happens, such as it will when Ukraine has F-16s, Ukrainian pilots can instead use the self-protect and targets of opportunity operational modes that HARMs are designed to use. The former uses the F-16's onboard radar warning receiver to identify radar waves as they're broadcast, passing that data to the HARM so that it can hone in on the location transmitting those waves and secure its target. Then it can hit regardless of whether or not the target powers down its radar equipment when the HARM is coming. As for target of opportunity, that system alerts the pilot when a radar array powers up, triggering them to launch their HARM at it in a more reactive mode. Either way, having F-16s means Ukraine's HARM missiles become more useful, and that spells bad news for Russia when it's coordinating its own aerial assaults. More bad news comes from the fact that F-16s will be capable of operating in Russian territory. Why? They could allow Ukraine to prevent Russia from conducting assaults with its glide bombs. In the early months of the Ukraine war, Russia's aerial offensive was far from as effective as it could have been. Ukraine's anti-air defenses helped to protect it from low-flying craft looking to drop bombs or support ground troops, with Radio Free Europe reporting that Moscow has likely lost at least 100 fixed-wing aircraft since the war began. A change of tactics was needed, and that change came through the use of glide bombs. Also referred to as CABs, glide bombs are repurposed Soviet-era weapons that have proven remarkably effective in Russia's campaign against Ukraine. They typically come in two varieties, a 1,100-pound version called the Fab 500 and a 3,300-pound variant dubbed the Fab 1500. Both are deadly, capable of reducing entire structures to rubble if they hit their targets. However, they're also outdated. The bombs have no advanced guidance systems, which meant that Russia would have had to drop them from behind enemy lines in their previous incarnations. But Russia came up with a very clever way to utilize these bombs. By attaching small wings to the Fab 500 and Fab 1500, Russia gives these massive bombs the ability to glide through the air over long distances. That allows the bombs to be launched from Russian planes well behind the war's front lines, meaning that the planes carrying the bombs aren't at risk of being taken down by Ukraine's anti-air defenses. The older tech in these bombs also plays into Russia's hands, as it makes them much harder to target using modern missiles and defenses. The impact of this innovation has been devastating for Ukraine. Glide bombs played a huge role in Russia's taking of Avdiivka, as a Ukrainian soldier named Igor Shuga highlighted it in a post on X, just days before Ukraine was forced to abandon the city. "These bombs completely destroy any position," he said. "All buildings and structures simply turn into a pit after the arrival of just one Fab, and they drop 60 to 80 pieces on us in one day." Russia is able to drop so many of its glide bombs for two reasons. First, the wings they're now attaching to the bombs serve as crude guidance systems. That means they can travel toward the vicinity of a target and cause massive damage, even if they don't score a direct hit. Second, those wings allow Russia to launch glide bombs with no danger of them being stopped by Ukraine's anti-air defenses. All are launched from the safety of Russian territory. The only real defense Ukraine could have against these bombs is to send its fighters into Russian territory to shoot down or chase away the Russian jets launching the bombs. That isn't possible with the planes Ukraine has now. They're too outdated compared to what Russia has, and certainly aren't fast enough to stop the glide bombs being launched. The arrival of F-16s changes all that. For context, Russia has generally been using its Su-35 aircraft to launch glide bombs. The Conversation reported that it started outfitting these jets with equipment to launch Fab 500s in March 2023, and it's been running saturation attacks with the bombs ever since. The problem for Ukraine is that the Su-35 is faster than the older Sus and MiGs that Ukraine has. So if Ukraine were to send its jets to try and chase off the Su-35s behind the front lines, they'd find themselves outpaced to the point where the Su-35s could still drop their bombs and even come back to fight the older Sus and MiGs Ukraine sends. That's not to mention that Ukraine's older jets would have to deal with Russia's anti-air defenses. A counter-offensive against the glide bomb-launching Su-35s was practically impossible. With F-16s in its arsenal, Ukraine will finally have a plane that's capable of competing against the Su-35. Granted, the Su-35 is faster, it can reach speeds of Mach 2.5 versus the Mach 2 that the F-16 can reach. However, that's balanced by the Su-35 being larger, making it easier to see on radar, and crucially, easier to pick out of the skies with a long-range missile. So the possibilities start opening up for Ukraine. With its F-16s, it will be able to better engage Su-35s in the air, forcing them to retreat both because the F-16 can almost keep up with the Su-35 and because the missiles fitted into the F-16, such as the previously mentioned HARMs, could down the Su-35. There are also suggestions that the Su-35 isn't as good as Russia claims it to be. That's according to a former US Air Force lieutenant colonel named Dan Hampton. He highlights that the Su-35's wingspan is over 15 feet wider than the F-16s, contributing to it being easier to pick up on radar, and that the plane is a typical Russian machine. According to Hampton, that means it looks good at air shows, but is actually not a great example of a multi-role jet. Perhaps that's why Russia has been relegated to using it to launch glide bombs from its own territory rather than using its S-35s to dominate the skies over Ukraine. Perhaps Putin knows all of this. If Hampton's claims about the Su-35 are true, the arrival of F-16s doesn't just mean that Ukraine reaches parity with Russia in terms of its multi-role fighters. It might have a jet that's actually better than the one Russia is using right now, even though there's a 30-year gap between the first F-16 being commissioned and the Su-35 first taking to the skies. Speaking of radar, the F-16 comes with advantages there too. According to Kelly Grieco, who works at the Stimson Center as a senior fellow, Russia is able to spot Ukraine's MiG-29s at a further distance than Ukraine is capable of spotting Russia's aircraft. Presuming the F-16 Ukraine receives are equipped with the AN/APG-66 radar, it will be far more capable of spotting Russian planes, meaning Ukraine can respond to aerial assaults much faster. That will prove useful when chasing down the Su-35s dropping glide bombs, even if it won't be enough for Ukraine to fully close the radar disadvantages it faces against Russia. So the F-16 doesn't necessarily completely outclass anything that Russia can deploy over the skies of Ukraine. But it is much better than what Ukraine has now, and it opens up a wealth of tactical and strategic options that weren't available to Ukraine before. The proper use of HARMs and other long-range missiles will be a boon for Ukraine, with the F-16 also capable of taking on the Su-35s Russia has used to great effect in recent months. The one bright spot Putin can take from all of this is that Ukraine won't have many F-16s, even when it's received every plane that the other nations have pledged to it. According to the New York Times, Ukraine may start with as few as 6 of the planes, once their pilots are trained, meaning they will have to be very choosy when it comes to deployment. The same newspaper also reports that around 45 F-16s have been pledged to Ukraine, less than half of the 120 Su-35s that Russia had at the beginning of the war. Putin clearly dreads the F-16s because they make Ukraine more versatile as both an attacking and defensive force in the air. But their importance shouldn't be overstated. 45 F-16s doesn't completely turn the tide in Ukraine's favor when Russia has so many more planes at its disposal. There's still another aspect of the F-16 that Putin fears. It's capable of carrying nukes. Putin mentioned this during his speech to his Air Force personnel in March 2024, and it had been highlighted by Russia almost a year before. In June 2023, Reuters reported that Russia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, told soldiers during a speech at the Dushanbe base in Tajikistan that we must keep in mind that one of the modifications of the F-16s can accommodate nuclear weapons. He's not wrong. Some variations of the F-16 have been altered to make them capable of carrying America's B-61 nuclear gravity bomb. A bomb that's been with the US military since 1968, the B-61 has undergone about a dozen iterations since its introduction. The most recent version, the B-61-12, measures 12 feet and weighs 825 pounds, with B-2A, F-15E, F-16C or D, F-16 MLU, PA-200, F-35, and B-21 models all being capable of launching it. It's designed to have 4 selectable explosive yields: 0.3 kilotons, 1.5 kilotons, 10 kilotons, and 50 kilotons, with its advanced inertial navigation system giving it the ability to strike a target with an accuracy of approximately 30 meters CEP. It's a terrifying weapon, and if used, could change the complexion of the entire war. Of course, there's a caveat to the Russian fear of the F-16's nuclear capabilities. Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. On top of that, the only country that could supply the B-61s Ukraine would need for its F-16s, the United States, would absolutely not do that unless Russia launched a tactical nuclear strike of its own. So perhaps Putin doesn't dread the F-16s because of their nuclear threat in the immediate sense. Instead, he may dread them because they give Ukraine a nuclear option of its own should Putin ever follow through on his repeated threats to use tactical nukes in Ukraine. Putin rightfully dreads the arrival of F-16s in his war against Ukraine. The plane gives Ukraine more tactical and strategic options thanks to their advanced weapon systems, and the fact that they serve as a useful counter to the Su-35s Putin is using for his glide bomb campaigns. He also dreads their nuclear capabilities, even if the possibility of Ukraine getting its hands on B-61s is practically nil. But perhaps more importantly, he dreads the F-16's arrival in Ukraine because that arrival is symbolic of Europe and the United States taking him more seriously as a threat. Not just to Ukraine, but to other countries should he win the war. Putin's constant mentions of how ridiculous the thought of him attacking another country is may not be indicative of his actual plans. Instead, it may be an attempt to pull the wool over the rest of Europe's collective eyes at a time when Europe seems to be waking up to the threat he could pose beyond Ukraine. But what do you think? Will the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine be a game changer, or does Russia have everything it needs to take on Ukraine's limited supply of these multi-role jets? Do you think the United States might start sending F-16s into Ukraine itself once its pilots have been trained appropriately? Tell us your opinions in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out why F-16s in Ukraine will end the Russian Air Force, or click this other video instead. June 24, 2023, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky renews his calls for the West to provide Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets. It's a call that he's made several times before, practically since the beginning of the war. He believes the American-made fighter will massively enhance Ukraine's defenses. As he puts it, "And when we ask to give us the F-16 fighters or the ATACMS, we're enhancing our common defense, real defense. This is what's needed. Now is the time to provide all the weapons necessary for defense." Back then, the Western nations that could deliver F-16s ignored the call, not because they didn't want to help Ukraine, but because they see the delivery of F-16s to the country as a potential escalation of the conflict that could draw them into the battle. Things change. Fast forward to mid-2024 and F-16s are on their way to Ukraine. What's more, Zelensky now has permission from several countries to use their weapons to strike Russia on Russian territory, marking the first time Ukraine has been able to do more than simply defend itself on its own land. This marks a huge shift in the war. F-16s will soon fly over Russia to bomb strategic positions that Vladimir Putin and his troops have been using to coordinate their attacks in Ukraine, and in doing so, they may create the risk of an escalation that could bring the full force of NATO into the conflict. That brings us to today's video and the key question: what does the F-16 bring to the Ukraine war? But before we dig into that question, it's worth examining how we got to the point where Ukraine is even in a position to use a plane that it hasn't had access to for much of the war. It all comes down to the United States. For the majority of the war, the US has supplied weapons to Ukraine with a simple caveat: Kyiv can only use them for defense. That meant no incursions into Russian territory and no strikes on strategic positions beyond Ukraine's borders. Ukraine respected those wishes, and the US had good reason to put those conditions in place. Speaking to PBS in May 2024, Emma Ashford of the Stimson Center noted that Ukraine had already been using non-US weapons to conduct long-range strikes on Russian targets, including oil refineries and factories. The problem, and her concern, came from the use of US weapons to conduct these attacks. I worry, and I think the White House is very worried, that allowing Ukraine to use US weapons to do that would be very escalatory. That created a problem for Ukraine. As Ashford's counterpart in the discussion, the former US ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, pointed out, that approach gave Russia free rein to attack from behind its border with Ukraine. If the Russians are firing at Ukrainians from a sanctuary, which is what they really have right now, then the Ukrainians ought to be able to shoot back. That's basic self-defense. That debate has been raging for almost 2 years, with the recent focal points being the Ukrainian Kharkiv region. As The Guardian reported in May 2024, Russia had started advancing north of Kharkiv with the intention of creating what Putin calls a sanitary zone along the border inside Ukraine. A 30,000-strong group of ground forces were gathered in the Belgorod region, with Russia backing those forces up with glide bombs. These bombs, which started life as general-purpose Soviet Fab bombs, are incredibly powerful and can be launched from behind the border to strike Ukraine. That's due to their gliding mechanism, which is essentially a pair of wings in place of a specific guidance system that allows Russian planes to drop them so they can glide over a large distance to a target region. Ukraine had little defense to these devastating bombs, not least because they were unable to attack the planes and installations behind the Russian border that were launching them. Ukraine needed permission to use the weapons it was receiving in Russian territory. And finally, the West's attitude to this problem is changing. On May 27, 2024, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly reported on the end of its spring session. During that session, the Assembly created a declaration urging Ukraine's Western allies to support Ukraine in its international right to defend itself by lifting some restrictions on the weapons provided by NATO allies to strike legitimate targets in Russia. Crucially, several major Ukraine allies supported the declaration, These included the Baltic state of Estonia, Poland, the Netherlands, France, and the United Kingdom. But perhaps the most surprising country on that list was the United States, arguably the nation that's most worried about escalating tensions with Moscow. Ukraine finally has permission to use American-made weapons in Russia, but again the permission comes with caveats. As The Guardian reported in May 2024, Biden's decision carries the condition that Ukraine can only use US weapons in the Kharkiv region and only for counterfire purposes. Ukraine also can't use American long-range missiles or ATACMS, which are tactical ballistic missiles, against Russia. But the decision opens the door for Ukraine to finally use an extremely valuable asset, the F-16. In truth, American approval for sending F-16s to Ukraine came long before it decided to allow their use behind the Russian border. A Reuters report from August 2023 noted that the US gave both Denmark and the Netherlands permission to send their American-made fighters, which triggered a coalition of 11 countries to form and start training Ukraine's pilots on how to use the jet. The donations of the jets are also starting to roll in. February 2024 saw Politico report that Denmark's first delivery of the 19 F-16s it's pledged should arrive at some point during the second quarter of 2024. The Netherlands won't be too far behind, not only with the 18 F-16s it originally promised to donate, but a further 6 it's able to send, after cancelling their sale to a private sector. Norway has also jumped onto the F-16 donation train by promising 22 of its F-16s to Ukraine, with Belgium adding another 30 to bring Ukraine's total to at least 95. The United States isn't sending any of its own stock to Ukraine, but the fact that it's provided permission both for other countries to send theirs and for Ukraine to use them across the border in Kharkiv is bad news for Russia. But why? Let's start with the F-16's specs. A multi-role fighter, the F-16 is capable of flying for around 500 miles when used in an air-to-surface role, with the US Air Force's website noting that it combines exceptional maneuverability with a high combat radius. That means it's capable of staying in the air for longer than many competing craft before returning safely back to base. The jet's engine delivers 27,000 pounds of thrust, and is capable of carrying 7,000 pounds of internal fuel, which can rise to 12,000 pounds with the addition of a pair of external tanks. At altitude, it can reach Mach 2, giving it a top speed of 1,500 miles per hour, and its flight ceiling is around 50,000 feet. But the highlight of the F-16, and one of the many reasons that Ukraine wants to have the jet in its arsenal, comes from its armaments. Each of the planes is equipped with an M61A1 20mm multi-barrel cannon, along with 500 rounds of ammunition. Essentially a powerful Gatling gun, this cannon can fire anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 rounds per minute, with its multi-barrel design delivering 10 times the reliability of single-barrel guns. The cannon is capable of shredding through opposing aircraft in a matter of seconds, as long as the F-16's pilot can keep supplying it with rounds. Then there are the missiles. F-16s can carry up to two 2,000-pound bombs, which Ukraine will find useful for taking out Russian installations and positions behind the Kharkiv border. It also has a pair of AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. These short-range air-to-air missiles are made by Raytheon and are capable of moving at supersonic speeds. Each has an infrared homing guidance system, which enhances its guidance and tracking functions, and is a heat seeker. That means it's capable of identifying and tracking the heat signature the engine of a hostile aircraft produces, allowing it to home in and strike before that aircraft even knows it's coming. And there's more. Along with the AIM-9, the F-16 comes with 2 AIM-120 missiles. Another Raytheon product, this missile has home-on jamming and beyond visual range capabilities, meaning an F-16 pilot can fire and trust it to hit a target without getting visual confirmation. Crucially, that also means the pilot can fire without the enemy establishing visual contact, making the AIM-120 useful for stealth operations. The missile carries a 39.9-pound explosive blast fragmentation warhead and has a built-in active radar guidance system. That makes the AIM-120 less dependent on the F-16's fire control radar, enabling the previously mentioned beyond visual range capabilities, and serves to guide the missile to its target once it reaches self-homing distance. All told, it's a massive upgrade on the outdated Soviet-era Su-24, Su-25, Su-27, and MiG-29s that Ukraine also has in its Air Force. That brings us to another question. What benefits will the F-16s bring to Ukraine? Beyond the quality and weaponry, GIS says that the F-16 is likely to bring both new political and military dimensions to the Ukraine war. Offensively, the F-16 gives Ukraine better attacking options. These include the previously mentioned bombings of Russian positions, which the F-16 can carry out, while also being capable of fighting or evading any defending craft Russia may send out to counter it. However, the jet's multi-role capabilities mean it'll be useful in other arenas too. For instance, GIS notes that the F-16 could provide close air support to Ukraine's ground troops, with its M61A1 cannons being useful against armored vehicles, along with its mere presence being enough to divert Russian aerial combatants supporting their troops on the ground. The AIM missiles the F-16 carries also enhance Ukraine's strike capabilities. On the political side, GIS theorizes using F-16s to strike military and symbolic targets in Russia could create political pressure, especially in terms of impacting the morale of Russia's troops. But there are limits here. Ukraine still only has permission to attack over the border in Kharkiv, meaning it's unlikely we'll see its F-16s straying too far out of Ukrainian territory. Hitting Russian targets also creates the risk of escalation, meaning Ukraine will have to be smart in choosing which targets to strike. Those directly supporting Russia's push into Kharkiv, such as fuel depots and temporary bases, are the most likely targets. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, digs deeper into the tactical advantages having a fleet of F-16s delivers to Ukraine. It says that the receipt of enough F-16s allows Ukraine to create a fleet in being that will gain Russian respect in the aerial battle. However, that fleet likely needs to grow larger for the F-16 to have a real impact on the ground war. For now, having around 80 of the jets gives Ukraine more options for carrying out strikes, but it isn't enough to allow it to go head-to-head against the might of Russia's Air Force. After all, despite Russia having suffered heavy aerial losses during the war, it still has 809 fighter aircraft it can deploy compared to Ukraine's 72. Even with the addition of 80 F-16s, Ukraine's fighter fleet only grows to 152, around a fifth of the sheer numbers that Russia can bring to the table. There are also the integrative effects of delivering F-16s to Ukraine to consider. CSIS notes that most of Ukraine's military equipment prior to the war was Soviet era. Not only did that create challenges in terms of preparing an adequate defense against Russia's more modern equipment along with its larger forces, but it's also created sustainability issues. Damage, part shortages, and lack of appropriate ammunition all had the potential to hamper Ukraine, meaning it wouldn't have been able to withstand an attrition war for too long. Western support with modern Western weapons not only partially solved the equipment volume problem, but also enabled Ukraine to integrate its defenses with those of other countries. Don't underestimate the importance of this move. With Ukraine having Western weapons, it now also has access to the supply chains that keep those weapons working. With NATO and US-made weapons comes access to standard equipment that Ukraine can maintain and keep loaded with ammunition. The arrival of F-16s into Ukraine furthers that integration. The country's Air Force no longer has to try and keep Soviet-era fighter jets ticking over to present any sort of aerial threat to Russia. It has one of the most popular American jets ever made, with a built-in supply chain of countries that can not only provide the jets, but everything needed to keep them running. You can see this from the countries that have already donated F-16s. None are the United States itself. All are European allies that use the jet and are a part of the wider Western supply chain that's funneling equipment into Ukraine. In essence, the F-16's arrival means Ukraine is even less reliant on old and Russian-made technology. There's also the air superiority issue. CSIS agrees with GIS in stating that the arrival of the F-16s, at least in the current and fairly limited numbers, is unlikely to give Ukraine air superiority. What will likely happen is a continuation of the air parity already seen, especially as both Russia and Ukraine have adequate air defense capabilities. The key difference is that the F-16 gives Ukraine offensive options. As mentioned, Kyiv finally has an aircraft that's capable of conducting bombing raids while defending itself from, or evading, Russian defenses. That won't be enough for Ukraine to claim the skies, but it should give it the option of taking out targets across the Kharkiv border, such as sites from which Russia is launching its glide bombs. Ukraine will also be able to establish localized air superiority for limited periods. Through effective coordination with ground troops, this localized superiority could be enough to help Ukraine launch counterattacks against poorly guarded Russian positions inside Ukraine, perhaps allowing Kyiv to reclaim some of the territory it's lost during the war. It's also important to note that deploying F-16s doesn't come without challenges. Key among these is the level of training needed to successfully utilize the F-16. Again, remember that Ukraine's pilots are trained in Soviet-era jets. Not only are these jets dated, but they use different systems than the F-16. The Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, highlights this by pointing out that the major upgrade the F-16 delivers over the Soviet jets Ukraine currently has comes with the caveat of extensive training being required to make a transition. It says that US training for foreign F-16 pilots is currently carried out at Arizona Air National Guard by the 162nd Wing. In all, that training typically takes 9 months and requires 90 hours of flight time on average. CFR says that several Ukrainian pilots are currently receiving that training as of March 2024, meaning they won't likely be ready to pilot the craft until the end of the year. In other words, Ukraine can't immediately deploy its F-16s and is going to have to spend several months fighting without them. The previously mentioned coalition of 11 countries formed to deliver training will help in some respects. For instance, CFR points out that Ukrainian pilots are also being trained at centers in Denmark and Romania, mitigating the need for pilots to travel to the US. Still, the training burden can't be overlooked. Even the most experienced Ukrainian pilots may feel like they're starting from scratch due to the array of complex systems built into F-16s that they won't have encountered in their Soviet jets. There's also the maintenance aspect to consider. An F-16 isn't a jet that you can simply keep hanging around until you need to use it. There are a lot of people who work on the ground to keep the jet in flying shape and ensure its weapon systems operate properly. CFR calls this the logistics tail of the jet, noting that a typical package of 12 F-16s requires a ground crew of 250 people to keep them viable. Given that Ukraine now has around 80 F-16s on their way, that means they're going to need at least 1,500 trained people to handle the ground crew duties. This crew includes typical maintenance staff such as mechanics, crew chiefs, munitions loaders, and airframe specialists. There's also the intelligence side of things. Each F-16 needs a team of intelligence analysts who feed data into its targeting systems and help to create the mission packages for the pilots. Without these ground crews, pilots are less effective operationally and are flying jets that may be incorrectly calibrated for the missions they undertake. Add to this the defensive requirements. Russia will surely target any F-16s it sees parked for extended periods, and the arrival of the F-16 isn't the cure-all for Ukraine's wartime woes. It's simply another tool in the country's ever-expanding arsenal, and one that, if used correctly, could allow it to conduct strikes within Russian territory. But there's a trade-off at play here. The F-16 facilitates higher-impact missions, such as the aforementioned bombing runs on Russian targets. However, they require more maintenance, even down to the state of runways. Given the jet's single-engine design, it's more prone to damage from littered runways than the Su-27 or MiG-29, another small challenge that Ukraine's F-16 support crews will have to handle. Finally, there's the biggest challenge of all, a challenge that affects both Ukraine and the NATO allies that are providing it with F-16 jets: Putin's threats. Speaking to Russian Airforce pilots in March 2024, around the time that the conversation about sending F-16s to Ukraine heated up, Putin seemed bullish in his response to the arrival of the jets. He told his pilots, if they supply F-16s and they're talking about this and apparently training pilots, this will not change the situation on the battlefield. Putin went on to claim that Russia is equipped to deal with F-16s just as it can handle tanks, armored vehicles, and any other equipment Ukraine can throw at it. In other words, Putin claims that Russia can just shoot Ukraine's F-16s out of the sky. That remains to be seen. More chilling is the warning he tacked on to the end of his speech. Of course, if they will be used from airfields in third countries, they become for us legitimate targets, wherever they might be located. The message is clear. If Ukraine is to have F-16s, the countries supplying them better not serve as launching points for those jets. If they do, they become targets for Russia and may be subjected to the same attacks Ukraine experiences now. Again, how legitimate that threat may be remains to be seen. Plus, it's extremely unlikely that any third country will allow Ukraine to take off within its territory, with the F-16s provided all likely to stay in Ukraine. Still, there's a clear escalation of tensions between Russia and NATO attached to the provision of F-16s. And according to several sources at NATO, the West needs to prepare for the possibility of further Russian aggression following the Ukraine war. One of those people is German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. Speaking to the German parliament, and as reported in Politico in June 2024, Pistorius claimed that Germany and NATO need to be ready for war with Russia by 2029. His reasoning partially comes down to growing concerns that Russia may extend the aggression it's showing toward Ukraine to several other Eastern European countries. The Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are at risk, as are Finland, Sweden, and perhaps even Poland. All are NATO members, and all have been a target for Putin's rhetoric. Not least because several have cautioned NATO and the European Union that Putin is unlikely to stop if he takes Ukraine. Pistorius echoes these sentiments, telling Germany's parliament, "We must not believe that Putin will stop at Ukraine's borders when he gets that far." His comments build on those from the German Army's chief inspector, General Carsten Breuer, who believes it will take Russia between 5 and 8 years to rebuild its armed forces following the long grind of the Ukraine war. According to Politico, that gives Germany and NATO until 2029 to ensure it's prepared for further Russian aggression. So perhaps the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine isn't just about supporting Kyiv in its efforts to fight off the Russian forces. It may also represent a change of attitude towards Russia. Europe in particular appears to be collectively waking up to the possibility that Russia's campaign may not end with Ukraine. Worse yet, every action European countries take to support Ukraine, from providing military aid to sending F-16s to Kyiv, heightens tensions further. Perhaps they'll find themselves in a catch-22, support Ukraine and risk angering Putin, or sit back and watch, potentially opening themselves up to become Moscow's next target. In that situation, it appears that many European countries are choosing to risk angering Putin. Several have already pledged or are in the process of sending F-16s to Ukraine, and it's possible that more will follow. While these jets won't grant Ukraine full air superiority, they, combined with the recent US approval for using them in selected Russian territories, give Kyiv more options for combating Russia's advances. Perhaps the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine could be a trigger for Ukraine mounting a pushback against the slowly advancing Russian forces. Alternatively, they might be the catalyst for a wider war erupting between Russia and much of Western Europe. Again, it all remains to be seen. This leaves us with one more thing to do. Ask you what you think the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine could mean for the war and the future of Europe. Do you think Ukraine can effectively use these jets to fight back against Russia, or are they too limited in number to make a real impact now that Russia has advanced so deeply into Ukrainian territory? Let us know what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out why Putin dreads the F-16, or click this other video instead. Air superiority is the single most decisive factor in modern warfare. The side that controls the skies gets to dictate the course of the battles below on both land and sea. For 2 long years, Russia has been the dominant force in the air over Ukraine as the Russo-Ukrainian war rages on. But Ukraine might soon be able to tilt the balance in its favor and reclaim the skies from the grip of its oppressor, all thanks to a single weapon system, the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The imminent arrival of the F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine promises to be a game-changer in the conflict, but only if Ukraine plays its cards right. Now, what do we mean by that? Stick around to find out. First, let's discuss why Ukraine needs the F-16 fighter jets in the first place. The answer is simple. As things stand, Ukraine has a modest air fighting force at best. This force is primarily made up of Soviet-era equipment that includes the Sukhoi Su-27 and the Mikoyan MiG-29 twin-engine fighter aircraft. Though these aircraft can be a formidable adversary in the right hands, as Ukraine has already proven, they simply lack the advanced capabilities a modern battlefield demands. To make matters worse, Ukraine's already lackluster air force has been severely depleted since Russia invaded the country on February 24, 2022. According to some estimates, Ukraine has lost over 300 total aircraft during this period, unmanned aerial vehicles included. Ukrainian officials have also acknowledged the difficulties in repairing and replacing the damaged aircraft. In a twisted turn of events, the only country that produces the spare parts for Ukraine's damaged Soviet-era aircraft is Russia, the very same country that damaged those aircraft in the first place. This dependency has severely hampered Ukraine's ability to maintain its air force and has highlighted the urgent need for modernization and diversification of its military assets. That's where the Western-made F-16s come into play. But why F-16s in particular? There are plenty of reasons Ukraine and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, have been desperately trying to get their hands on these fighter jets since the very beginning of the invasion. You see, the F-16 fighter jets are significantly more adept at targeting and destroying ground targets compared to Ukraine's fleet of Soviet-era aircraft. Their laser-guided precision bombs can wreak havoc on virtually any enemy position with unparalleled accuracy. Besides accuracy, the F-16 will improve the distance and speed at which Ukraine can conduct airstrikes. The F-16 can fly at twice the speed of sound and strike targets on the ground more than 500 miles away. This should allow Ukraine to take out Russia's ground-based defenses more easily. The F-16s are also equipped with more modern electronic systems and better radars. This adds to their ability to detect and engage targets more effectively while also allowing them to be more survivable in hostile airspace. According to some predictions, the F-16 versions sent to Ukraine will be equipped with an upgraded version of the AN/APG-66 radar, which has an air-to-air range larger than 60 miles. Talk about having eyes in the sky. Here's just some of the armaments the F-16 will be equipped with. One M61A1 Vulcan 20mm Gatling-style rotary cannon with over 500 rounds. AN/AAQ-13 and AN/AAQ-14 Lantier navigation and targeting pods. Up to 4 LAU-61, LAU-68, LAU-5003 or LAU-10 rocket pods. Up to 6 air-to-air missiles, including the AIM-9 Sidewinder. Up to 6 air-to-surface missiles, including the AGM-65 Maverick. Up to 4 anti-ship missiles, including the AGM-84 Harpoon. and up to 12 bombs, including the B-83 nuclear bomb. It's also important to note that the F-16, like most Western aircraft, are significantly more pilot-friendly than Soviet-made aircraft. Though this is notable in and of itself, it becomes crucial to the Russo-Ukrainian war, as pilot training is one of the major obstacles Ukraine has to overcome if the F-16s are to make any difference. But more on that later. For now, let's stick to the F-16's pilot friendliness. The F-16 boasts intuitive controls and displays that are designed to reduce pilot workload and enhance situational awareness. Simply put, the F-16 jets are designed to do more with less work. All the controls the pilot needs are easily accessible and logically arranged, allowing the pilot to make split-second decisions in high-stress situations. And the pilots flying over Ukraine are sure to have their fair share of such situations. But there's another crucial reason why Ukraine wants the F-16 fighter jets in particular. As mentioned, these are Western-made jets primarily used by Western air forces, including the NATO countries. For Ukraine, using the F-16s means improved interoperability and compatibility with NATO forces. That's why the country hasn't gone for the Swedish-made Saab JAS-39 Gripen or French-made Dassault Rafale fighter jets. Though also Western-made, these jets are barely used by NATO countries. Of course, mere interoperability and compatibility with NATO countries is far from the end goal. The end goal is for Ukraine to become one of those countries. So what's the wait? Why haven't the F-16s been provided to Ukraine as soon as Zelensky requested them so he could speed this whole process along? Well, remember who Ukraine and the West are dealing with: Russia. Do you really think the Eastern Colossus would sit idly by while Ukraine receives decisive Western weapons and moves closer to NATO? Not a chance. According to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko, the supply of F-16s to Ukraine would carry enormous risks for Western countries involved. He also labeled this transaction a move up the so-called escalation ladder, accusing Western forces of pushing for an escalation scenario. As for Russia, Grushko claims the country will take the F-16 acquisition into account in all its plans and that it has all the necessary means to achieve the set goals. Given how unpredictable Russia is, it shouldn't be surprising that even these vague warnings are taken seriously by Western powers. After all, we're talking about the country that went through with the invasion of Ukraine when virtually the whole world claimed it wouldn't dare. That's why the road of the F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine has been rather slow. But how many of these fighter jets should make their way to Ukraine in the first place? In other words, how many F-16s does Ukraine need to achieve air superiority? If you ask Kyiv, the answer is 200. That's the figure Ukrainian officials mentioned in January 2023. That's also the number that would instantly place Ukraine in the top 5 countries in the world by number of F-16 fighter jets in their inventory. However, if you ask military experts this question, the answer will be much lower, 50% lower to be precise. Around 100 F-16s is the highest figure being bandied around that would give Ukraine air superiority. However, according to some military experts, even 24 F-16s would be enough to make a difference and bolster Ukraine's air power in a meaningful way. But the number of F-16 fighter jets Ukraine will receive doesn't really matter, not if they don't come with the necessary training, support, and infrastructure to effectively utilize these aircraft. Just look at it this way. Ukraine can receive 1,000 of these aircraft and overtake the US as the country with the most F-16s, but if it lacks the expertise and infrastructure to maintain and operate them, the jets would be little more than expensive decorations. That's why military experts are adamant about one thing. Acquiring F-16 fighter jets won't give Ukraine air superiority over Russia, well, at least not automatically. To reach this endlessly desirable goal of air superiority, Ukraine would first have to lay the groundwork for these efforts. But what does the groundwork refer to in this situation? The first aspect, unsurprisingly, is adequate training. When discussing how many F-16s Ukraine would need to make a difference, a former British Royal Air Force officer said the country would need dozens of competently operated F-16s. Of course, competently operated is the key phrase here, as you can't expect Ukrainian pilots just to hop in the F-16 jets and conquer the skies above. To do that, they must first be trained. And this training doesn't take days or weeks. It takes months. 18 months to be precise, according to Colin Kahl, the Pentagon's former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and that's the best-case scenario. But why will this training take so long? After all, an average new F-16 pilot should learn the ropes in about 8 months. Well, unfortunately, there are numerous aggravating circumstances when it comes to training Ukrainian pilots. For starters, not all of these pilots are proficient in English, which significantly extends the duration of their training. That's why the pilots sent for the first round of training were cherry-picked based on their strong English language skills. It's also important to note that the number of these pilots was quite limited, and this doesn't have to do with their language skills. Ukraine simply couldn't afford to take too many pilots away from the battlefield, which is another factor contributing to the prolonged training process. Other than that, learning a new system can be tough, even for experienced pilots. They must be trained to the point that they can commit the movements to muscle memory. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to act and react quickly and effectively under pressure. For pilots with less experience, the training process is even more challenging, as they first have to familiarize themselves with the F-16 aircraft in a classroom. This part of the training typically lasts about 3 weeks. Over the next month, aspiring F-16 pilots are eased into flying the jet. The training starts with basic daytime flying and moves into nighttime, bad weather, and instrument flying, all technically demanding aspects of flying. Then it's time for the star of the show: air combat. This is where pilots learn to engage in aerial dogfights, employ air-to-air weapon systems, and practice evasive maneuvers. After 6 to 8 weeks of air combat instruction, air-to-ground training ensues. This training takes another 2 months. As you can see, the months are passing by, and we're still in the basic instruction domain. It will take several more months for Ukrainian pilots to learn how to carry out specialized missions and advanced tactics, such as coordinating with ground units and carrying out multi-aircraft missions. Given how complex this training is, it was of vital importance for it to start as early as possible, and luckily it did. The list of countries pledging to train or already training Ukrainian pilots includes Poland, the US, the UK, Denmark, and the Netherlands. According to reports, the 12 pilots undergoing training in the US are expected to complete their program by May 2024, marking the earliest completion date in the ongoing Ukrainian training initiatives. In contrast, most pilots trained in Europe are not expected to finish until late 2024, despite 10 pilots recently completing their training in the UK. There are also 6 advanced pilots trained in Denmark that could be ready much earlier. But pilots aren't the only personnel trained. Ukrainian ground crews must also learn how to service the aircraft. After all, an average F-16 jet is only flyable 25 to 50% of the time. In the meantime, it's being serviced. According to some estimates, each F-16 needs about 20 maintenance hours between flights, which explains the need for a well-trained ground crew to keep the jets operational and mission-ready. Also, a huge part of laying the groundwork doesn't even have to do with people. It has to do with, well, the ground. You see, F-16s require smoother runways, centralized bases, and other specialized infrastructure to operate seamlessly. This means that Ukraine has to resurface its existing runways and consolidate bases to accommodate these aircraft. Now, this is a challenging task itself. However, it becomes nearly impossible when you consider it must be carried out without attracting Russia's attention. Russia's unwanted vigilance is another major obstacle to operating the F-16s successfully. At present, Ukraine can only use dispersed airfields and makeshift runways to fly its Soviet-era aircraft. If consolidated F-16 bases were to be used, they would become the primary targets of Russian airstrikes. This leads us to another vital aspect of laying the groundwork for F-16 jets in Ukraine: establishing sufficient air defense systems to protect the F-16 bases. And every defense system dedicated to these bases is a system drawn away from the Ukrainian front lines, which increases the risk of Russian advances in other areas. To make matters worse, defense isn't the only thing Ukraine must consider when it comes to the F-16 jets. The offense is no walk in the park either. You see, most of the Ukrainian existing weapons come from the Soviet era. This means that they can't be fitted on a Western-made aircraft like the F-16. In other words, besides the jets themselves, the Western allies would also have to supply Ukraine with missiles and other weapons for air combat. Fortunately, this process is also underway, with the US supplying Ukraine with the AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles, HARM, as early as 2022. When fitted on an F-16, these missiles can target and destroy enemy radar installations, helping to suppress enemy air defenses and clear the way for other aircraft. Of course, these missiles are just the beginning. Ukraine also needs advanced air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles, precision-guided munitions, and other modern weapon systems that enhance the F-16's capabilities in various mission scenarios. Only with all these boxes checked, training, infrastructure, defense, and armaments, can Ukraine dream of achieving air superiority over Russia. But given how fiercely the country has been fighting for its sovereignty, this dream is bound to become a reality at some point. So let's see what F-16 fueled air superiority truly means for Ukraine. With the arrival of F-16 jets to Ukraine, the country's offensive and defensive capabilities will receive an immediate boost. This will transform the sky above Ukraine into a highly contested battlefield, forcing Moscow to change its operational strategy and stretch its military resources. In the air, Kyiv would be able to achieve two things almost instantly: securing local air superiority and preventing Russia from maintaining the overall air superiority. As far as local superiority goes, it refers to carving out specific areas where Ukraine can dominate for a few hours or even days. If you're wondering why the local approach, the answer is simple. Even with additional F-16s, the total number of aircraft Russia has outnumbers that of Ukraine several times over. To put this into perspective, all you need to know is that Russia has over 800 fighter aircraft. So even if Ukraine were to receive all of the 200 units it requested, Russia would still have 4 times as many aircraft. However, it's important to note that despite this massive discrepancy between Russia and Ukraine's air forces, Russia hasn't truly managed to establish foolproof air supremacy over Ukraine since the beginning of the invasion. This surprising failure mostly has to do with poor training and numerous Russian attack aircraft touted as superweapons turning out to be useless in contested airspace. The result? The country's so-called supremacy was patchy at best, which is why we're even discussing a scenario in which Ukraine can take over the skies. Even with its outdated equipment, the Ukrainian Air Force has managed to dent its oppressors' air superiority efforts. So with the addition of the F-16s, Russia can kiss this superiority goodbye. Essentially, the F-16s would make the airspace over Ukraine too dangerous for Russia. Though to be fair, Ukraine has managed to deny Russia air superiority even before the F-16 jets entered the picture. Early in the war, Ukraine managed to shoot down quite a few Russian aircraft, causing the Russian Air Force to stop flying into contested airspace. Given that Russia cowed in the face of Ukraine's old equipment, it's safe to assume the country will be even more cautious when facing a modern and well-equipped Ukrainian Air Force with F-16 fighter jets in its arsenal. Before the F-16s, a Ukrainian aircraft going directly against a Russian aircraft in the air would almost always be considered a suicide mission. Now, with much faster and more maneuverable aircraft, Ukrainian pilots can turn the table on their adversaries. However, the biggest change caused by Ukrainian air superiority wouldn't take place in the air. Instead, the ground and sea battles would benefit the most. Sure, Ukraine won't be able to carry out NATO-style air campaigns immediately, which are known for integrating air power and other military capabilities. However, the country would be able to conduct well-selected precision strikes that could help it blast its way through Russian-held territory. Thanks to the F-16s and cluster rockets Ukraine has previously received, virtually any Russian target in this territory would be in Ukraine's range. This would allow Ukraine to take back some of its territory, which is currently impossible to do on foot. Why? Because Russia has planted landmines in a large portion of the occupied Ukrainian soil, making a land takeover another suicide mission. In this case, Ukrainian troops would die either at the hands of the mines themselves or Russian air attacks targeting them while they try to get over the minefield safely. But using F-16 fighter jets isn't only about attacking the enemy forces, it's also about defending Ukrainian troops. Currently, these troops are often devastated by Russian attack helicopters and fixed-wing glide bombs, but this could all change with the introduction of the F-16. In other words, the F-16 jets might be able to bring much-needed relief to the Ukrainian front lines, as these have been severely shaken up in the past few months. Though the situation at sea is much more advantageous for Ukraine than the one on the ground, the F-16 could help the country seal the deal in the Black Sea. For now, Ukraine has already managed to take out a significant percentage of Russia's Black Sea fleet with existing weapons and a whole host of asymmetric warfare techniques. With F-16 jets, Ukraine almost won't have any need for these innovative techniques. It can simply blast away. Attacking the Black Sea Fleet and the Kerch Bridge, connecting mainland Russia with Crimea with F-16-fired missiles, could even help Ukraine achieve its long-sought-after goal, taking back the Crimean Peninsula. Even without the F-16 jets in the sky, Russia has already pushed its Black Sea bases away from Ukraine. It's also withdrawn most of its vessels from the area, leaving a single ship, according to some reports. Though these moves can be explained by Ukraine's incessant military pressure, some experts also tie them to the imminent arrival of the F-16. This would mean that Russia itself is also well aware of the danger these jets pose to its military operations in the region. However, it's important to note that any significant change in the Russo-Ukrainian war won't happen overnight. Most experts don't see F-16s bringing Ukraine instant air superiority. Instead, they emphasize the importance of these jets in the long run. For starters, the F-16s will allow Ukraine to continue to have an air presence as the country's Soviet-era aircraft are being phased out due to aging, wear and tear, and attrition. They will also allow the country to carry out increasingly more complex missions in the future, several years down the road. Basically, this means that the F-16s are a long-term commitment toward building a stronger Ukrainian Air Force, even past the current conflict the country finds itself in. But when will this endeavor officially begin? Despite rumors circulating in December 2023, Ukraine still hasn't received a single F-16 fighter jet. However, this is bound to change very soon, in June or July 2024. Depending on when you're watching this video, Ukraine might have already received these jets and set off on the path toward air superiority. Interestingly, though the arrival of the F-16 jets is imminent, it's still not clear who will actually supply them. This probably has to do with the looming fear that Russia might interfere with the delivery process or even exact revenge against the sender. So for now, all we can do is speculate. Many experts believe that the first batch of F-16s will arrive from the Netherlands. After all, the country's Prime Minister Mark Rutte said that the Dutch government started preparing an initial shipment of 18 jets in December 2023. After the initial shipment, the country would send another 6 jets, as its total number of promised jets is 24. Denmark is another strong contender, as the country pledged to deliver 6 jets by the end of 2023. Obviously, this didn't happen. However, according to some reports, the deadline was pushed back by some 6 months, which would make the new delivery date sometime around June. These 6 jets would also be just the beginning, as Denmark pledged to send 19 F-16s in total. Belgium has also promised F-16 jets to Ukraine, but these likely won't arrive before 2025. Norway also has plans to send up to 10 F-16s to Ukraine, but the country hasn't discussed any fixed delivery schedule. As you can see, the list is missing one crucial country, which coincidentally manufactures these aircraft: the US. Though the US promised to approve any transfer of F-16s to Ukraine, the country didn't pledge to give these aircraft directly. The US has likely chosen to go through partner countries in Europe in an effort to reduce direct confrontation with Russia. After all, the US is widely believed to be the country's #1 enemy by a margin. However, the US will still be heavily involved in these transfers, beyond just giving them the okay. Together with several European countries, it will supply the hardware like munitions and additional equipment, make its jets and instructors available for training, and conduct this training on its soil. The other countries involved in this coalition include Canada, France, Greece, Luxembourg, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Sweden, and the UK. Let's say Ukraine does manage to achieve air superiority with the help of these countries. This outcome raises another important question: will air superiority be enough for Ukraine to win the war? Though Ukraine seems to think so, military experts aren't as sure. While no one can deny the strategic value of air superiority, victory in a war typically requires a much more extensive combination of factors, and in this case, most of these factors favor Russia. But what do you think? Do you believe the F-16s have the power to change the course of the Russo-Ukrainian war? If not, are they at least enough to guarantee Ukrainian air supremacy, or are we looking at a more favorable air situation at best? And what do you think Russia's reaction will be to the imminent arrival of the F-16s to Ukraine? Will this move only ramp up tensions, or do you see a more significant escalation happening in the future? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Now go and check out why Putin dreads the F-16, or click this other video instead. Throughout the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian conflict, neither side has managed to exert air superiority. Despite Russia's larger fleet, Ukraine's clever use of air and anti-air defenses, supercharged by NATO-supplied weapons, has kept Russian planes at bay. But the game could change. Late in 2023, the US made a pivotal move by agreeing to send F-16s to Ukraine, making a first in Ukrainian aviation history. Could these jets tip the scales, offering Ukraine a chance to claim the skies? The F-16, though not the newest kid on the block, is no slouch. As a versatile, late fourth-generation fighter, it's not just about achieving air superiority. It's about providing a flexible option for both attack and defense. Thanks to its all-round capabilities, the F-16 has secured its spot as a mainstay in the fleets of numerous countries and stands as a pillar among NATO forces, outpacing older Soviet and Chinese models. Could the introduction of the F-16s into Ukraine's arsenal rewrite the aerial warfare playbook? Let's explore what these jets bring to the high-stakes aerial duel. When it comes to the supposed efficiency of the F-16s, it's important to compare them to the powerhouse of the Russian and Ukrainian air forces, the Su-27. From a technical standpoint, both F-16s and Su-27s belong to the fourth generation of combat aircraft, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. The Su-27 was designed to be an air-to-air dogfighting and air superiority aircraft. It's fast and efficient at taking out enemy air forces. With a top airspeed of about 160 miles per hour more than the F-16, an Su-27 can outmaneuver other similar aircraft in close-range combat. Keep in mind that the Su-27s that Russia and Ukraine use are technically not the same aircraft. Both Russia and Ukraine inherited their fleets of Su-27s from the Soviet era, yet Russia has since enhanced its aircraft with significant upgrades. Moreover, Russia's arsenal includes the advanced Su-35s, giving it a broader range of modern aerial capabilities. Despite these challenges, Ukraine has shown resilience and adaptability with its available Soviet-era aircraft. In 2022, Ukraine faced tough losses, with 62 aircraft down during combat missions. Given that Ukraine's air force comprises about 80 fourth-generation MiG-29 and Su-27s, these losses impacted the number of operations conducted in 2023. Remarkably, the losses were reduced to 7 aircraft in that year, underscoring the Air Force's strategic adjustments and efforts to preserve its fleet. This reduction in losses highlights Ukraine's capability to adapt and continue its aerial defense efforts, despite having lost approximately 40% of its air power. Ukraine's Air Force relies on its existing fleet and international support, as the country does not currently produce new aircraft. This reliance on older models and the challenge of securing spare parts for maintenance are significant hurdles. However, the potential integration of Western aircraft like the F-16 into Ukraine's arsenal could open new avenues for enhancing its aerial capabilities, offering hope for bolstering Ukraine's defensive and offensive air strategies. Still, the reliance on already obsolete aircraft has turned the Russo-Ukrainian battle into a prolonged war of attrition. In light of the heavy losses accrued during 2022, Ukrainian tactics have shifted from aerial attacks on Russian soil to mid-range operations to take out key pieces of the Russian army infrastructure and command. The tactic is bolstered by the fact that Ukraine has already received plenty of ground-to-air missiles and weaponry, allowing its army to support air operations with anti-air defenses. Ukrainian aircraft therefore can launch a hit-and-run attack on Russian forces and duck behind the heavy Ukrainian air defenses, making the operations less likely to result in the loss of aircraft. But this air battle isn't straightforward. Russia does possess a bigger fleet with around 100 Su-27s and an additional 130 of the more advanced Su-35s, and Russian radars spotting targets from 100 miles away outrange Ukraine's 55-mile reach, letting them spot and counter threats, including drones and missiles, sooner. Their R-77 missiles can hit targets from 80 miles out, a capability Ukraine lacks, putting Ukrainian jets at risk before they even know what hit them. But despite these advantages, the fight for air dominance remains at a deadlock. Russia doesn't have enough concentrated long-range capabilities to take out NATO-provided air defenses. Similarly, Ukrainian planes don't have the range to reach further out from the same defenses and strike key Russian infrastructure and military hardware to make a meaningful advance. That's where the F-16 aims to completely overturn the tide of battle. F-16s have a more powerful radar system, which has a range of over 110 miles in its most potent version. This gives the jet a significant edge over Russia's improved Su-27s in target acquisition and tactics. Additionally, getting F-16s also means that Ukraine will gain access to modern missiles that are compatible with the plane's mechanisms. Most notably, this includes the AIM-120 AMRAAM, which is one of the most versatile and destructive missiles in active use. AIM-120s have a range of 65 to 100 miles and have gained a fearsome reputation due to their use in various wars during the 21st century. It's one of the hallmarks of America's ongoing air supremacy, and its capability to lock onto and track a target fills a hole in Ukraine's arsenal. The missiles easily outgun Russia's R-77s, which will allow Ukraine to penetrate deeper into occupied territory or Crimea and even strike at targets on the Russian mainland. The active radar system inside the R-77s and AIM-120s also means pilots won't have to maintain a lock onto their targets. The system slots perfectly into Ukraine's existing hit-and-run tactics, meaning that pilots can combine their experience with modernized ordnance and planes to gain an advantage. Giving Ukraine F-16s and AIM-120s will provide stability against Russia and maintain control over its airspace. One of the key factors that makes F-16s considerably more powerful than their Soviet counterparts is their general reliability. F-16s have an expected lifespan of between 3,500 and 4,500 flight hours. Accordingly, their components are generally expected to last for that period, and the airplane can remain in service with minor repairs and maintenance. After that, the mechanical parts have a much higher chance of breaking down due to wear and tear, and the wiring might fray and damage important electrical components. By contrast, older Soviet MiGs and Sukhois only have an expected lifespan in the range of 2,000 to 3,500 hours. Similarly to how Ukraine had to reduce flight operations between 2022 and 23 to counter airplane loss, Russia has also had to moderate its Air Force use. The oldest aircraft that Russia has used, MiG-29s and Su-27s, are much closer to the end of their lifespan. Furthermore, since Russia needs to mount an offensive, its planes typically have to fly in from farther bases, making each operation more demanding on Russian aircraft than Ukrainian aircraft. In fact, the prolonged nature of the war between Russia and Ukraine has also brought about a major concept in maintaining air superiority called imputed losses. The concept refers to the fact that the military will lose some of its key equipment or weaponry not due to enemy fire, but to parts breaking down from wear and tear. According to estimates by the RAND Corporation, Russia has lost between 30 and 60 aircraft solely to imputed losses over the last 2 years. If we take the average value, around 45 planes have been grounded because their parts can no longer operate. Russia has needed to fly their planes more frequently and push them to their limits, but it doesn't have enough manufacturing capacity to offset those losses. Based on RAND's report, Russia can produce between 18 and 36 modern aircraft per year, and it's assumed that it will need to cut down its Air Force operating capacity further to maintain its existing fleet. Since the country is still midway through replacing old Soviet-era planes with Su-35s, it's possible that they will prioritize using Su-27s. The main reason being that it will become prohibitively expensive to maintain a fleet of Su-27s. Russia might consider putting them up as sacrificial lambs in combat to allow more modern aircraft a better chance of survival. This means that Ukraine is more likely to see Su-27s and other fourth-generation aircraft used against them over the course of the war. With many reports suggesting that Russia doesn't have a concrete plan of pushing into Ukraine for the rest of 2024, it's possible that this would be Ukraine's time to push back on Russia's encroachment into their airspace. And that's where the newly donated F-16s could prove pivotal. These planes are coming from Denmark, around 25 aircraft, and the Netherlands, roughly 52 aircraft. The planes are likely relatively well preserved since the countries involved haven't needed to use their air force to a great extent over the past 20 years. With F-16s being a more competitive aircraft model, Russia will have no choice but to activate more of its air force to compensate. This will lead to further use of both modern and obsolete aircraft in the VKS, the Russian Aerospace Forces, increasing how often they perform sorties to counteract the F-16's improved radar detection and targeting range and avoid infrastructural losses. As a result, the increased aircraft usage will compound the imputed losses that the force will suffer throughout the war. Therefore, Russia might actively lose whatever advantage it has managed to hold onto for the last 2 years. Ukraine might even be able to take back contested areas, or at least manage to maintain air superiority over them. This will allow them to mount a concerted counter-offensive should the Russians ever falter on any front. Finally, if F-16s give Ukraine control over its airspace, they can be used to make offensive strikes deeper into Russian territory, taking out key artillery pieces that make ground combat more favorable for the Ukrainian forces. These victories in Ukrainian airspace could also prove fantastic for improving morale in the Ukrainian army. The soldiers have already managed to stave off the invasion with incredibly limited access to newer technology and being heavily outnumbered. With the addition of more advanced and reliable aircraft, they could push the Russians further out of Ukraine. But if the F-16s would have made so much difference for the Ukrainian forces, why have deliveries only started in late 2023? The answer to that hinges on the volatile state of global geopolitics. Over the past few years, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has issued statements suggesting that the US delivering F-16s to Ukraine would be seen as a direct threat to Russia. This stems from the fact that F-16s technically have the capacity to carry nuclear warheads instead of traditional missiles, at least according to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Some have speculated that Russia would be willing to push the nuclear button on what it perceives to be grave transgressions against the country's efforts in Eastern Europe. This could plunge the entire world into a war, with many sides accruing significant losses as nuclear weapons are dispatched by all countries who own them. It should be noted that this is a similar strategy Putin has exercised in the past, even at the beginning of the invasion after it was clear that Ukraine wouldn't fall in 10 days. However, if the US took a chance and gave Ukraine F-16s at the start of the 2022 conflict, there's no telling whether Russia would follow through with that threat. But in recent years, Russia has pretty much exhausted its diplomatic options. With the Western countries becoming independent from Russia's oil and gas, Putin was forced to turn to China and India and other smaller trading partners to compensate for the income loss. However, that means that Russia has lost the upper hand in many negotiations and is currently positioning itself as a minor trading partner for China. As a result, leaders in the US and NATO were likely considering that the threats from Russia were empty and decided that they wouldn't lose too much and decided that they wouldn't lose much if they donated F-16s to Ukraine. Additionally, Russia's repeated attacks on civilian infrastructure has seen an increase in public support for Ukraine and may have encouraged the US to act faster to help shorten the war. The versatility of F-16s to carry both air-to-ground and air-to-air missiles means that they can be used to take down enemy drones and ordnance conducting strikes on civilian targets. Russia's situation is further complicated by the fact that its main ally throughout this war, China, seems to have gone silent on the matter. Considering China's goals to reduce American influence in the Indo-Pacific, it may be preparing to go to war with either the US or Russia to expand its claims and obtain more resources. That puts Russia in a hard situation where they won't have the backing of the world's second superpower should they make an impulsive decision. With the arrival of the F-16s, Ukraine will get a sizable boost in firepower. This comes in the form of advanced missile guidance systems that the planes can carry. While Ukraine already has access to some of the latest missiles available, such as the Storm Shadows, their capabilities were stunted by the fact that the MiG-29 and Su-27 weren't native platforms that can carry and guide them. The Ukrainian army had to cobble together makeshift carrying systems that could take these missiles into the air and launch them at the enemy. However, their range and accuracy took a hit, and their usefulness as precision strike missiles were largely nullified. With the addition of the F-16s, though, the army can now make full use of advanced weaponry to close the gap between Russia's numerical and technological superiority. Apart from the Storm Shadows, one potential game-changer associated with the F-16 donation is the AGM-88 HARM missile. This is an anti-radar missile that eradicates enemy positioning systems, thereby disabling them from launching long-range precision strikes. With these capabilities in Ukraine's possession, Russia will need to position its key artillery infrastructure closer to the border or withdraw it entirely. Furthermore, this strategic repositioning will also play to Ukraine's advantage. Due to the F-16's longer radar range and long-range capabilities, Ukraine will be able to exert more pressure on Russia's artillery, allowing it to eliminate Russia's long-range support equipment. What the F-16 will also bring to the table is improved mission control and tactical information access. Su-27s still rely on analog interfaces and gauges to display relevant information. However, since each display is limited to one piece or type of data, the cockpit of an Su-27 is loaded with displays and knobs, creating an information overload for the pilot. On the other hand, F-16s have integrated digital display systems. The digital screen allows the pilot to switch between different viewing modes and information panels. Apart from reducing visual clutter, the digital display has a much higher fidelity and responsiveness. All information that a pilot needs to consider at any given time can be accessed with a switch. However, the F-16 isn't the perfect solution for the Ukrainian military just yet. One of the most critical hurdles that need to be overcome is the lack of experienced pilots who can effectively navigate the F-16's modern systems. Since the Ukrainian Airforce so far has had no direct contact with F-16s, its pilots have never been trained on its modules. According to some estimates, it would take between 4 and 6 months to retrain a pilot from an Su-27 to an F-16. This is further complicated by the fact that most Ukrainian soldiers aren't proficient in English. While this might not seem significant, it's important to remember that training manuals and manufacturing manuals are rarely translated into languages as uncommon as Ukrainian, which is spoken as a main language only in Ukraine itself. This means that the US or another NATO country would need to partake in a monumental task of translating all manuals to Ukrainian while ensuring they are consistent and logical. Since this wasn't seen as a priority at the time, another option is to teach Ukrainian pilots English to a sufficient level. Even the few Ukrainian pilots who are proficient in English and can start training immediately need between 2 and 4 months before they would be combat ready. Additionally, F-16s require a different military airport strip setup. Soviet planes from the 20th century were designed to be operated from remote areas with minimal ground control support and short takeoff and landing strips. By contrast, the F-16 has a lengthier takeoff procedure. MiG-29 and Su-27 planes have built-in ruggedness that ensures that the planes can endure adverse takeoff conditions, which the F-16 isn't particularly built for. For example, there have been videos of MiG planes being able to take off from regular civilian roads, something that's pretty much unthinkable for more modern aircraft. As a result, Ukraine will have a much more limited number of military airfields that can be used to field and deploy F-16s from the country. Due to the more elaborate logistical planning and reduced options, Russia might have an easier time spotting and monitoring airstrips that are used to deploy F-16s into the fray. To reduce the risks, Ukraine's best option is to field its F-16s in the western portions of the country, which are the furthest from the Russian front. However, this reduces the effective range of the jets, which would reduce their combat prowess. This is further compounded by the fact that F-16s actually have a lower travel range than Su-27s. While their fuel tanks are almost 4 times larger, the newer airplane chugs through fuel much quicker. A purely defensive position on the opposite side from the front would be economically inefficient, making the Ukrainian army much more reliant on fuel import than usual. Finally, F-16s are much more difficult to maintain than older Soviet aircraft. According to some estimates, the Su-27 requires 11 hours of maintenance for each flight hour, while an F-16 needs 17 hours for the same flight time. Additionally, Ukraine will be hard-pressed to adequately train its ground crews to maintain the craft. NATO countries can contract out ground crews, but that still poses a risk of having foreign civilians in a warring country. Regardless of the challenges involved in the process of integrating F-16s into the Ukrainian Air Force, the West remains cautious about donating these aircraft. While a big reason for that is the general unwillingness to let the war prolong even further, Western countries are also heavily incentivized to do so. The F-16s donated to Ukraine won't be brand new aircraft just out of the factories. All planes going to Ukraine will be older vehicles that haven't seen much combat and real use, but that are becoming obsolete and replaced with newer designs. By donating the F-16s to Ukraine, NATO countries can offload the cost of decommissioning the airplanes and their surrounding equipment and support. It might not seem like much, but removing a jet from active duty requires a significant logistical effort, which takes time and money to implement. By offloading those planes to Ukraine, the US, Denmark, and the Netherlands can save some of that money and provide much-needed political and military support to the country. It also showcases to the world that the West stays united with Ukraine in their fight against Russia. Despite these challenges, the F-16s should start seeing active use in Ukraine by the second quarter of 2024, with delivery orders being fulfilled until 2025 if the war continues. While Russia remains undeterred by the progress of Ukrainian aerial forces, Ukraine is well on its way to implementing training programs to use the aircraft to their fullest. With this injection of firepower, Ukraine will gain renewed hope of prolonging and turning the tide of the war. While the bulk of Russia's air supremacy comes from a larger fleet, F-16s will allow Ukraine to get up to speed technologically with the modernized Su-27s and even be able to go toe-to-toe with the Su-35s. And even though the F-16s are by now considered obsolete compared to the modern F-35s, they can still have a few final hurrahs in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Despite the fact Ukraine might not be able to field them for another few months, the army has shown considerable enthusiasm into making full use of these aircraft. With that, the F-16 will be remembered as another high point in the history of 20th century military aircraft design. How do you think the fight between Ukraine's F-16s and Russia's Su-27s and Su-35s will play out? Will the aircraft be enough to give Ukraine a better fighting chance, or do you think it's a case of too little, too late, and that the jets should have been deployed at the start of the conflict? Let us know in the comment section. Now go and check out how the F-35 could achieve air dominance in Ukraine within 24 hours, or click this other video instead. When Sweden's Civil Defense Minister Carl-Oskar Bolin said there could be war in Sweden, urging the citizens of Sweden to start preparing for war mentally, many were left wondering the same thing. Why would a country that didn't fight at all in the world wars and who hasn't fought in more than 200 years suddenly announce that they need to be ready for war? This statement has sparked a lot of controversies, with people asking questions like, is it because Sweden realized its intention to join NATO? Is it because Russia invaded Ukraine? Will Russia invade Sweden? All these might be true, or it might be that even though Vladimir Putin might be considering invading Sweden as part of his grand plans, the real reason is that he's scared of Sweden, more specifically of the JAS-39 Gripen. Today, we'll take a look at why the supersonic JAS-39 Gripen makes Sweden's Air Force so powerful, and the reason why it might make Putin think twice before finally deciding to invade. But before we get to that, just why are the politics of the Baltic region and NATO so important? Many will have heard of the Baltic region, but if you haven't, well, it's the region of countries that surrounds the Baltic Sea, which includes Russia, Finland, Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Sweden. All these countries had been coexisting relatively peacefully until Russia realized that all the other countries in the Baltic region had joined NATO, a fact that doesn't sit well with Russia and was one of the reasons for its invasion of Ukraine. NATO and Russia have a long history dating back to the period after World War II, when Russia was still part of the USSR. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed in 1949 by the USA, Canada, and many Western European nations, with a primary aim to provide security against the USSR. Ever since its creation, there has been a Cold War between NATO and the USSR for dominance. With the USSR's dissolution in 1991, the tension in Eastern and Western Europe was supposed to stop, but Russia just continued where the USSR left off. However, there have been a couple of treaties between NATO and Russia, including the Founding Act in 1997, which improved the partnership between Russia and NATO. Even though it never became a part of NATO, Russia had permanent residence and access to NATO's headquarters in Brussels. However, this relationship completely broke down when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. Ever since, there has been no conciliation between NATO and Russia, but there was the implied agreement that NATO would keep its Cold War policies in as much as Russia keeps its army and troops in Eastern Europe. However, although NATO has not moved in physical might, they have been expanding their influence towards Eastern Europe, which is what Putin doesn't like. And that was one of the things he mentioned before going into Ukraine. If Ukraine joins NATO and decides to take Crimea back through military means, European countries will automatically get drawn into a military conflict with Russia. And now, a similar thing is happening again. But this time, not with the land borders of Russia, but the maritime border in the Baltic region. All of the countries there are now part of NATO, with Sweden being the most recent to join. So what's the current relationship between Sweden and Russia? While we can say that joining NATO has unequivocally created more tension between the countries, the two have not exactly been friends for some time. Back in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the EU placed sanctions on Russia, and Sweden voted for them. In retaliation, Russia added all countries in the EU to their list of unfriendly nations. In response, Sweden and many of the countries in turn labeled Russia persona non grata. But the animosity between the two countries began long before 2022. The two countries have a long history of conflicts, dating back centuries, including the Finnish War, where in 1809, Russia took control of Finland from Sweden. During World War II, Sweden had proclaimed neutrality, but it still borrowed some planes from Finland when Russia, then the Soviet Union, invaded it. Even though Sweden was neutral in the war, it had a pact with the US that in a situation where the Soviet Union tried to invade Sweden, the US would come to Sweden's defense, but that never happened. Also, there is the incident of the Soviet Union shooting down two jets that belonged to Sweden in the 1950s, one belonging to the Swedish government and one to a civilian. But it didn't stop there. In 1981, Sweden discovered a Soviet Union Whiskey-class submarine in its waters, and it took up to 10 days before a diplomatic agreement that returned that submarine to the Soviet Union could be reached. All these point to the fact that both Sweden and Russia have had it back and forth with each other, so there is definitely an historical precedent if another attack on Sweden is suggested. And with Russia invading Ukraine, the idea is not far-fetched. But should Sweden actually be expecting an invasion? Ever since the invasion of Ukraine, the countries surrounding Russia have unsurprisingly started spending heavily on their militaries. Most neighboring countries to Russia like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who were formerly under the USSR, just like Ukraine, believe there is a possibility that Russia could invade them in the future, just like they did Ukraine. These countries are relatively small, but even Poland, a relatively large country neighboring Russia and Ukraine, is also unnerved by Russia's erratic actions and is strengthening their military might. Also, these countries are members of NATO, which means in Putin's head, they are threats to the security of Russia. These countries will take their military strength seriously if Russia decides to come at them. There's even a prediction from Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who said that NATO should be prepared to face Russia in 3 to 5 years. Even though Sweden doesn't have a land border with Russia, the maritime border they share, and Russia's behavior in the past, have prompted Sweden to strengthen their military might as well. This was evident in the information the Swedish government passed out in 2022 about increasing military spending to 2% of the country's GDP. As explained by the Swedish defense minister, the reason for this is that the country is facing the most serious security policy situation since the end of World War II. As of 2024, the defense bill was drafted in which 2% of the country's GDP would go to military spending, a whopping 27 billion krona, equivalent to $2.3 billion US. This money is supposed to go toward their NATO membership payment and developing the military, especially their Air Force, which is one of the reasons why Putin will need to be careful before thinking about invading. Which brings us to the real reason why Putin should be scared of Sweden, or more specifically, its Air Force. Since Sweden hasn't been involved in a war in a very long time, many people don't know about the country's true military might, especially what they can do in the air. The Swedish Air Force, or SWAF, was created in 1926. And even though this arm of the military did not have the chance to perform during the Second World War due to the country's neutrality, they are extremely effective, both on paper and in reality. The real beginning of the strength of the Swedish Air Force stems back to when the country decided to heavily invest into nuclear weapons research. It may not seem like this would lead to a powerful Air Force, but stay with us. Faced with the hostile presence the Soviet Union posed after World War II, and to protect themselves from likely future assault, Sweden, under the guise of civilian defense, started researching their own nuclear weapons. The project was fairly successful and progressed to the stage where underground testing was possible, but the Riksdag, Sweden's supreme decision-making body, decided that the exploration of nuclear energy shouldn't be used to build weapons, but instead to create a defense against nuclear attacks. And this is what would lead to a more powerful Air Force, as much of the money that had been pouring into developing nuclear weapons was now diverted to the Air Force. The beginning of investment that surged Sweden forward and placed them among the countries with the best air forces in the world. Around that time in the 1950s, the Air Force then decided to use the large funding to start the creation of their domestic aircraft. As a result of all the money well spent, during the Cold War, Sweden became the world's fourth most powerful air force with about 1,000 modern planes, which introduced the Saab A-32 Lansen, Saab J-29 Tunnan, and the Saab J-35 Draken. And that was just the beginning. Now, thanks to that lineage, Sweden has created arguably one of the best fighter jets in the world, the single-engine supersonic multi-role fighter jet JAS-39 Gripen. When the prototype was demonstrated in 2009, the fighter jet reached the supersonic speed of Mach 1.2, or around 913 miles per hour. And it did this without the use of an afterburner, making it better for higher range and giving it fuel-saving advantages. The Gripen has several variants, including the Gripen JAS-39C and D, as well as the JAS-E and F. The only difference between the C and D is that the C is a single-seater, while the D has room for two, same for the E and F. And even though the C, D, and EF are fairly similar, the EF is the newer, updated version. Both have features that would make anyone think twice before getting into an aerial battle with Sweden, even Putin. The Gripen JAS-39CD is powered by a Volvo RM12 engine, with an afterburner capable of reaching speeds of Mach 2, and can operate at heights over 49,000 feet, or 15,000 meters, without issue. Although it's equipped with sophisticated avionics, it's the Gripen's arsenal that truly gives it an edge over its rivals, thanks to a 27mm cannon and 8 hardpoints for missiles and bombs, which means it can both win duels in the air and destroy targets on the ground. The Gripen JAS-39EF, which is the newer version, is an even more dangerous multi-role combat aircraft that's capable of air fighting and ground-based air attack missions, thanks to its increased payload, longer range, and more advanced electronic warfare capabilities. It also has a more powerful engine, the General Electric F414 GE39, which also has a top speed of Mach 2, but a higher operational ceiling of 52,000 feet, or 16,000 meters. Having such a powerhouse in the sky makes one thing very certain: no one would want to mess with them. Putin is even one of the few world leaders who should want to engage in an aerial battle with Sweden. Even though Russia is one of the top 3 air forces in the world on paper, they are facing a lot of trouble converting those stats into real-life results. This was made evident very quickly when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia's supersonic fighter jets like the Su-34 and Su-57 that were supposed to dominate the Ukrainian airspace started to fall to manpad-launched surface-to-air missiles. Many of Russia's fighter jets were seen running from the battlefield, and some pilots even abandoned their jets because they weren't effective enough. If even manpads can stop Putin's air attacks, think about what supersonic, hyper, and recently updated Gripens would do. The Su-34 and Su-57 wouldn't stand a chance. But as we've seen, losses don't always dissuade Putin, so what would really happen if Russia decides to invade Sweden? Will Sweden be able to protect itself, or will it end up on the receiving end like Ukraine? There are many who think that because Sweden is relatively small, that it will be an easy target. But as we've seen, Sweden has an ace up their sleeve in their air defense, and it isn't all due to their powerful fighter jets. Sweden has prioritized military advancement after the end of the Second World War, and they've been able to hone their craft well enough that any country that wants to attack or invade them would have a really tough time doing so. And because Sweden isn't necessarily interested in expanding its territories into other countries, its military weapon system development has focused more on defense than attack. Because of the small territory, they've created and honed strategically the best weapons for their defense position. Sweden not only has the Gripen JAS as a monument for military advancement, but they also have one of the best anti-tank missiles, the NLAW, the best anti-ship missiles, the RBS-15 family, and one of the world's best submarines. This means Sweden has a solid air, water, and ground game when defending its region from hostility. If Putin wants to try invading Sweden, he'd have a hard time even entering Swedish airspace, let alone standing toe-to-toe with the Gripen. It's imperative that any country that considers invading Sweden not underestimate the military capabilities of its air force, and specifically its advanced fighter jets. But what do you think? Could Russia pull off an invasion of Sweden? Would the Russian Air Force be able to take on the Gripen JAS-39? Let us know what you think in the comments. The S-400 air defense system has become a hot commodity on the global stage, hailed as the crown jewel of military hardware. From Algeria's acquisition in 2021 to Belarus beefing up its arsenal in 2022 to counter NATO, and even China securing units to guard the contentious Senkaku Islands and Taiwan from 2018, the S-400's client list reads like a who's who of global powers. India joined the club with a whopping $5.3 billion deal in 2018, undeterred by political sanctions from its ally, the United States. Meanwhile, Turkey, a NATO member, faced real sanctions, trading access to the F-35 program for the Russian defense system. The widespread adoption and the risks nations are willing to take to possess the S-400 beg the question, is it really the ultimate shield it's cracked up to be? Can it truly outsmart fifth-generation stealth fighters? In this video, we're diving deep into the world of the S-400, examining its strengths, shortcomings, and debunking myths. We'll also talk about why its NABO-M radar system sucks, and how its lack of interceptors make it vulnerable compared to other air defense systems out there. And we also look into questions like, can Putin's prized air defense system pinpoint and neutralize US fighters before they deploy their arsenal or coordinate a strike from afar? Let's see what our military experts have to say. But first, it's origin story time. Russia's S-400 Triumph is an evolution of the Cold War-era S-300 air defense system. It's a mobile system capable of shooting down aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles. It also has a terminal ballistic missile defense capability. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the S-400 has the mission equivalent to the United States' Patriot missile defense system. Born amidst the post-Soviet turmoil of the early 90s, the S-400, a successor to the formidable S-300, emerged not as a reinvention, but as an evolution. With 70 to 80% of its technology rooted in its predecessor, how did Russia enhance this system to meet the modern battlefield's demands? The leap from S-300 to S-400 brought significant advancements, upgraded radars, new missiles extending its reach, and fortified defenses against electronic attacks. But with these improvements, just how much more effective did the S-400 become? Introduced in 2007, boasting a range of up to 400 kilometers and the capability to engage 80 targets at once, the S-400 represents a leap in defensive technology. Each battalion's 8 launchers, equipped to fire 4 missiles each, stand ready to challenge the skies. But that's not all. The S-400's primary weapon system is the 48N6 missile series, which has a 250-kilometer range and can intercept incoming ballistic missiles across a radius of 60 kilometers. Reportedly, these missiles are capable of intercepting hypersonic projectiles up to a speed of Mach 8, flying at the edge of its range. Intercepts of targets flying at speeds over Mach 14 have also been reported. Two additional missiles are supposedly under development for the S-400 launcher. The first is the 77N6. Unlike the other two, this missile uses hit-to-kill technology equivalent to the Patriot's PAC-3. Such technology provides a particular advantage in a nuclear missile defense role, as the lack of a detonation would limit radioactive fallout. The 77N6 was in testing as of July 2021 and was supposed to enter service in 2022. The same missile was also meant to be available for Russia's newer S-500 system. However, both this missile and the S-500 appear to be behind schedule, perhaps unsurprisingly. The third missile supposedly in the S-400's arsenal is the 40N6. This projectile is supposed to bring the S-400's range up to 400 kilometers. In July 2023, it reportedly completed new tests. In November, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that it would be producing at least 1,000 of these missiles in 3 years, though sanctions make this production rate questionable. The experts at CSIS are also skeptical that the S-400's radar capacity will allow the 40N6 to operate at its purported range. The S-400 is one of the key pieces of military infrastructure for the heavily fortified Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic coastline. In addition to territorial defense, the Russian strategy for its deployment there has been to use it as an anti-access area denial system to disrupt the movement of NATO forces should a confrontation arise. The S-400 also saw service with Russian troops deployed in Syria, and it's a key aspect of Russia's strategy to defend Crimea. On February 25, 2022, the day after the invasion, the S-400 got its first confirmed combat kill when it shot down a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet operating around the country's capital of Kyiv. The kill of the plane, piloted by Colonel Alexander Oksenchenko, who was well known on the airshow circuit, was reportedly the longest-range downing of an aircraft on record. The S-400 continued to prove its worth in early March 2022, when it shot down 4 more Ukrainian Su-27s on the 5th of that month. Aside from its purported long-range and high-altitude defense, the S-400 is also capable of being used in offensive roles. In January 2023, Russia used the air defense system as part of a missile attack on Kyiv, with the staging point being Bryansk Oblast within Russian territory. Debris recovered after the attack by Ukrainian forces confirmed that the missile in question came from the S-400. So in the S-400, Russia has a formidable defensive and potentially offensive system, but just how good is it, really? Unfortunately for the S-400, the results in real-world, non-biased tests seem to indicate that it doesn't quite live up to the hype the Russians have built for it. At this point, we're not exactly surprised. Given Putin's track record of overhyping his weapons' capabilities in the past, perhaps skepticism was warranted all along. So what exactly falls short in the S-400's capabilities? Perhaps the best example came from the Turks. In December 2021, only a few years after it purchased the S-400 in the face of American sanctions, Ankara announced it would be going full throttle in developing a domestic air defense system to replace the Russian import. This is because Turkey actually accused Russia of fraud in the advertising of its S-400. These accusations came through the results of a series of tests in early 2020, where the S-400 was put up against drones and F-16 fighter jets. The Turks found that although their S-400 systems could indeed track targets up to 400 kilometers away, the said targets needed to be at an altitude of at least 20 kilometers for the air defense to work at the range it was advertised for. If the target drops below 5 kilometers, the efficiency drops enough to allow enemies to attack the S-400's position. The detection efficiency at such low altitudes, the Turks claim, drops between 30 and 40%. When the target drops to an altitude of 1 kilometer, the S-400's effective detection range goes down to a distance between 70 to 180 kilometers, depending on the terrain. Below 1 kilometer, the range drops enormously to only a few kilometers. In other words, the S-400's range is highly dependent on terrain, weather conditions, and the altitude of a target. The Turks say that low-altitude missiles and loitering munitions are therefore highly effective against the S-400. This sounds pleasing to the ears, but there is a problem with the assessment, and we will look into that in a bit. Right now, let's take a look at the S-400's supposedly greatest aspect and a key part of its hype for export, the inclusion of the Nebo-M radar system. Is it all it's cracked up to be? Here's how it works. This radar uses a pair of low-frequency arrays in the VHF and L bands. Supposedly, such low-frequency radar bands enhance the S-400's ability to detect stealth aircraft like the F-22 and F-35. These planes are specifically designed to be less detectable to high-frequency radar bands because these are the bands which enable missiles to hit their targets. In contrast, lower-frequency radar bands such as the VHF and L bands are better able to detect stealth aircraft from a long distance, and they are not designed to be stealthy against these frequencies in the same way. At first glance, the S-400 system is well equipped to handle this mission. A 2014 study done by Konstantinos Zakidis of the Hellenic Air Force seemed to reveal that the Nebo-M radar was capable of detecting the F-117 Nighthawk 250 kilometers away and could still detect it at a range of 72 kilometers even when under attack from enemy electronic warfare efforts such as jamming. This seemed to suggest that the S-400 would indeed be effective against stealth aircraft and capable of shooting them down. However, there are several problems with this item of hype. First, the F-117 was retired from active service in the late 2000s, so it was a poor choice to use as an example. Second, the F-22 and F-35 are far less detectable than the F-117, with radar cross-sections between 2 and 30 times smaller. Most importantly, being able to detect a stealth aircraft is not the same thing as being able to shoot it down. Detection with a low-band radar in the VHF and L bands will not by itself allow the S-400 to shoot down an incoming F-22 or F-35 because this is not sufficient for it to get a lock with one of its missiles. Only detection at higher frequencies can successfully guide a missile home. To get around this problem, the two low-frequency bands are designed to share their data with the third band in the S-400, the high-frequency Gamma S1 array, which broadcasts in the X and S bands. These can guide a missile to its target. In essence, the two low-frequency bands first track the incoming fighter, and then the high-frequency array is capable of using that data to shoot it down. Or so the Russians say. In a contest between the S-400 and America's stealth aircraft, the outcome comes down to a simple question. Will the Russian air defense system be able to detect and shoot down the fighters before they can use their own weapons or call in a strike from somewhere else? Because of their smaller radar cross-sections, the F-22 and F-35 will be able to evade detection from the S-400 at much shorter ranges than the F-117. If the F-35's cross-section is, as reported, about the size of a golf ball, the Lightning II would only be detectable up to a range of about 20 miles, and that's at a low frequency. The USAF brass has admitted that the F-35 is stealthier than the F-22, but the Raptor would have a more or less similar level of protection. These two fighters would therefore almost certainly be in a position to destroy the S-400 with a long-range air-to-surface missile before they can be detected, much less threatened with a surface-to-air missile like the 48N6. For these reasons, shooting down the fifth-generation fighters is a much taller task for the S-400 to overcome than being able to casually shoot down the fourth-generation fighters that it did in the early days of the war in Ukraine. The problem becomes more pronounced when considering that the F-22 and F-35 have electronic warfare measures. Unlike the Su-27s it had demonstrated success against in February and March 2022, America's planes would be jamming the S-400. Ukraine's planes couldn't do this. But the S-400 has another problem that makes it less effective than it's hyped to be. At best, a full battalion would be able to launch 32 missiles in the sky. All air defense systems will be overwhelmed if the volume of incoming fire exceeds the system's capacity to respond. This is how Hamas overwhelmed Israel's vaunted Iron Dome in its October 2023 terrorist attack. The thousands of rockets that it launched into Israel, low-tech as they were simply too much for Iron Dome to overcome in such a short time. A typical Iron Dome battery consists of 3 or 4 launchers with a capacity of 20 missiles per launcher, making for a total between 60 and 80 missiles in the system. Its high capacity is one of the reasons it's proven so effective in countering projectiles that threaten Israeli population centers. The American-Norwegian NASAMS is another air defense system with a high payload capacity. A typical NASAMS-2 battery consists of 12 launchers, each of which has 6 missiles apiece, meaning that it can have 76 interceptors on standby. A Patriot battery, meanwhile, hosts 6 to 8 launching stations. Each launcher can carry 4 PAC-2 missiles or 16 PAC-3 missiles. As such, a typical Patriot battery has between 24 and 128 missiles, depending on how many launchers there are in the battery and whether the PAC-2 or the PAC-3 is the intended missile. So we see that the S-400 is lacking in interceptors compared to other air defense systems out there, including the Patriot, its closest American equivalent. The best way to overwhelm it would therefore be to launch a series of low-altitude cruise missiles or drones. We don't need to look at the Turks' test in 2020 to bear this conclusion out. In April 2017, the United States launched a series of cruise missile strikes against targets in Syria in response to the Bashar al-Assad regime's use of chemical weapons in that country's civil war. The American cruise missiles specifically targeted the Shayrat Air Base near the city of Homs. There were S-400 systems in the area to defend the base. However, they failed to intercept the incoming American projectiles at a distance of 175 kilometers, far less than the purported 400-kilometer range that it has, and even less than the 4A-10-6's effective range of 250 kilometers. Not a single American cruise missile was shot down in that operation. A year later, the United States again launched a cruise missile attack against targets in Syria with a similar level of success. The S-400 may also be vulnerable to much lower levels of technology than that seen in the United States' fifth-generation fighters. Recall that the S-400 bases at least 70% of its technology on the older S-300. The supposedly advanced Nebo-M radar system is the same as that used on the S-300, and the older air defense array has proven vulnerable against strikes from cruise missiles and drones like the Turkish Bayraktar TB2. In both Syria and the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2020, the S-300 and its Nebo-M radar proved less effective against both of these arms. However, in an actual conflict between the United States and Russia, things would not be this simple. The S-400 is at its best when it's part of an integrated air defense network with other assets like AWACS planes. The Turks did not use its S-400 system in this way during their tests, so its less than perfect results for them might not have been surprising. The same goes with the Syrians in 2017. The presence of these planes will increase the efficiency of the S-400 significantly. All the same, Ukraine has proven quite good at detecting and shooting these planes down in early 2024. Russia has lost 2 of its 9 modernized operational A-50 AWACS planes to Ukrainian air defense missiles. In an air environment against an adversary like the United States, with even longer-range missiles and almost certain air superiority, if not air dominance, these planes would have a much harder time operating unimpeded, especially when the USAF can deploy the coming AIM-260 JATM in large numbers by the end of the decade. Russia would need to hide its A-50s at greater distances and behind fighters and air defense systems to defend them, making them less effective. In Ukraine, the S-300F air defense system proved incapable of stopping the cruiser Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, from being sunk through a combination of drones to provide distraction and subsonic Neptune cruise missiles to deliver the killing blows. The poor weather that day again seemed to suggest that the S-300 and its successor, the S-400, had comparatively poor performance against targets flying at low altitudes, especially in less than optimal environmental conditions. The S-400 has had other problems in Ukraine. On August 23, 2023, an S-400 system defending Crimea mysteriously went up in flames near the village of Olenivka, on the peninsula's westernmost point. It was not clear what exactly caused the explosion, though experts suspected that a long-range air-launched Storm Shadow cruise missile provided by the British and French was responsible for the incident. It's also possible that the strike could have come from a Neptune or Harpoon anti-ship missile modified to hit targets on land, although this was less likely. Either way, even in the presence of a more integrated air defense network, the S-400 proved incapable of defeating a Ukrainian precision missile strike. According to the Oryx blog, Russia has lost 1 command post for an S-400, 1 5P-85T2 launcher, 5 5P-85SM201 launchers, 1 92N6A radar station for the S-400, and 1 support truck for the air defense system as of March 7, 2024. All of these have been destroyed. The destruction of the support truck in January 2024 seemed to confirm that Russia had deployed its S-400 system on internationally recognized Ukrainian territory for forward combat operations. Previously, the Russian armed forces had been known only to deploy the S-400 in Crimea within Russian territory and within the borders of Belarus to create a north-south area of coverage over the entire front in Ukraine. Despite its hype as a stealth-killing system, the S-400 likely isn't going to be taking out F-22s and F-35s anytime soon, even if it can detect their presence with its low-frequency radar. The United States' coming 6th-generation fighters, the Air Force's NGAD and Navy's F/A-XX, will almost certainly be even less observable than the 5th-generation fighters, making the S-400's task of defending the skies over Russian positions that much more difficult. The F-35's situational awareness adds another wrinkle to the S-400's prospects in a conflict, as its flying supercomputer attributes enable it to link with other assets in all branches of the United States Armed Forces to create what the brass at the Pentagon calls a kill web. This will be especially pronounced when the F-35 gets its Block 4 upgrades. So, for example, the F-35 might be able to spot an S-400 air defense system, and then, instead of attacking it itself and making it more vulnerable to being counterattacked, it can instead relay the data to a ship offshore that can then in turn send a barrage of cruise missiles against the Russian target, or command drones to attack it in order to cut down on costs. The coming 6th-generation fighters in America's air fleet will improve upon these abilities. All of this is not to say that Russia's S-400 is a poor quality system, but rather that the claims that it can destroy stealth aircraft just because its low-frequency radar might be able to detect them likely would not stand up to scrutiny in a real-world confrontation. Its comparatively low amount of available ammunition per battery would also be a problem in a full confrontation with the United States and NATO. The S-400 remains capable, but like usual, just not as capable as Russia claims. What do you think about Russia's S-400? Was it worth it for Turkey to acquire in the face of American sanctions? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Now go and check out why the war in Ukraine shows the US military would destroy the Russian military, or click this other video instead. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more military analysis from military experts. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has cut an increasingly desperate figure in recent months. The war with Russia has entered its 3rd calendar year. The crucial city of Avdiivka has just fallen into enemy hands. A vital new military aid package from the US has been delayed in Congress. At no time in the conflict has the situation looked bleaker for the beleaguered Ukrainian people. In a report in the UK's Guardian newspaper from February 20th, Zelensky is quoted as saying that the situation is extremely difficult, an understatement or a tacit admission of defeat. Whichever way you interpret his words, the war looks to be slipping out of Kyiv's hands. But what if there was one piece of serious military hardware that could not only give Ukraine the edge over Russia, but do so within 24 hours? Pie in the sky? Wishful thinking? Maybe not. Enter the F-35 Lightning II fighter jet. But what's so special about this particular aircraft, and why could it play such a decisive and swift role in the conflict? According to Lockheed Martin, an American aerospace arms and defense corporation, the F-35 is the centerpiece of 21st century global security. The pilots who've flown the jet wholeheartedly agree. According to a report in Business Insider, Billy Flynn, a former Canadian lieutenant colonel and senior F-35 test pilot, told The Aviationist in April 2023 that the jet could play a key role in the conflict. The F-35 was designed precisely for an environment that we are seeing in Ukraine now. Principally funded by the US, the F-35 first flew in 2006 and entered full military service with the US Marine Corps in July 2015. But in terms of actual combat, the jet was first used in 2018 by the Israeli Air Force. To give you an idea of how highly the F-35 is regarded, the US plans to buy 2,456 jets by 2044. This will constitute the bulk of the crewed tactical aviation of the US Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps for several decades. Additionally, the aircraft will be a cornerstone of NATO and US allied air power and operate until 2070. It could easily be classed as the most sophisticated fighter jet in the world. Add 10+ years of combat experience into the mix and you'll get an even better idea of the difference it could make in the war in Ukraine. But perhaps the F-35's most potent ability is being able to link up and share target data with other ground, naval, and air units, meaning the enemy is facing 5 opponents instead of 1. Even without any upgrades, the F-35 outperforms other fighters in the US fleet. It's been proven to defeat adversary aircraft in exercises by a truly stunning 20-1 margin. Better still, it accomplishes a broader array of tasks, and it's easier to maintain than other fighter jets. By some distance, it's the most reliable tactical aircraft in the Joint Fleet. So the jet most certainly has an impressive pedigree. But what exactly does the F-35 Lightning II bring to the table in terms of combat capabilities, and how could it provide the crucial air dominance Ukraine wants over Russia? A multi-role stealth aircraft, this jet has been designed for air superiority and strike missions. Equipped with a powerful electronic warfare and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance suite, it offers the ultimate in aerial firepower. Just as importantly, the F-35 can gather and distribute real-time battlefield information to friendly forces that we just mentioned. its weapon capabilities are potentially devastating and incredibly versatile. In a configuration known as Beast Mode, it carries 4 500-pound GBU-12 laser-guided bombs on its wings, 2 GBU-12 in its internal weapons bay, and an AIM-9 air-to-air heat-seeking missile. And while that may mean sacrifices in stealth for firepower, we're still looking at a very dangerous piece of equipment. Moreover, the F-35's ability to enhance the capabilities of friendly aircraft would be invaluable in the conflict in Ukraine. Why? The jet excels in highly contested airspace and would be far more effective than the F-16s that have already been deployed to the area and will be deployed in greater numbers later in the year. Particularly adept against surface-to-air missile systems and other ground defenses, it will easily destroy them and any enemy aircraft to achieve air dominance. How? The aircraft's stealth profile. These capabilities are crucial to the aircraft's effectiveness, never more so than in any potential deployment in Ukraine. The F-35-2 was designed for wars where the front lines are contested with surface-to-air missile radars, SAMs. Granted, Russia has powerful SAMs, only they can't be deployed near the front lines. Another tick in the box for the F-35-2. If nothing else, the Ukraine conflict has shown just how vulnerable fourth-generation aircraft are to air defenses that are 40-plus years old and even considered antiquated by some armed forces. Russia has been deploying SAMs in Belarus, Crimea, as well as in the Donbass and Kherson region, effectively covering large parts of Ukrainian airspace. For that reason, Ukrainian pilots have been restricted to flying over grasslands, highways, and treetops throughout the conflict to avoid detection. That's why the F-35 would be so effective in not just heading a bombing campaign from the outset, but also routine air-to-air and air-ground sorties. The bottom line, the aircraft can strike wherever and whenever needed. The result, air dominance, maybe within as little as 24 hours. Make no mistake, air dominance is one thing, but the F-35 would also be crucial in helping Ukrainian forces regain lost territories and ultimately banish the Russians from their soil once and for all. For many, however, the ace up the sleeve for the F-35 is in terms of pure kinematics. In attrition warfare, where each aircraft has a clear view of the other, it's simply a matter of whoever launches the missile first will win the battle. In a low observable F-35, however, the aircraft wouldn't be seen by the enemy fighter jet. Therefore, the pilot can shoot a missile before the adversary is aware of its existence. For that reason, it would eliminate the need to play the kind of kinematic tactics that have been a part of aerial combat through all the years of third-generation and fourth-generation weapons and fighters. So how would the F-35 fare against its Russian counterpart, the Su-30? While both are advanced fighter jets, the F-35 is more designed for air-to-air and air-to-ground combat. In comparison, the Su-30 is a highly maneuverable and agile fourth-generation fighter, designed to be in dogfights, close-run engagements, with ultimate deployment and strategy perhaps being the deciding factor, but we'll discuss the more tactical side of Russia's Air Force plan later in the video. And there's more. Once air dominance is achieved, backup aircraft like the F-16 could provide additional firepower against ground troops, with the all-singing and all-dancing F-35 patrolling the skies to protect them. Potentially, it could have played a decisive role in the battle for Avdiivka. With aerial support of this magnitude, the key town in the Donbass region would likely not have fallen into Russian hands. Theoretically, therefore, as few as 4 F-35s could provide air superiority over a limited area, such as the skies in Ukraine. In a report in Air and Space Forces magazine, Air Force General Todd D. Walters, who also serves as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, concurred with that theory. He said that getting more F-35s to Europe, either as part of the US Air Force or for other nations, is critical. More specifically, he claimed, they'll deliver a tremendous improvement in strategic ability, in indications and warnings, command and control, and mission command. Now, all of this might sound incredible. If Zelensky's allies want to bring an end to the war as quickly as possible, then the F-35 too has the tools to do the job. But wars are never straightforward affairs to conduct, and most importantly to finance. By the same token, it's in nobody's interest for the conflict to drag on and on into 2025 and beyond. With that in mind, what is the likelihood of Ukraine receiving the 4 F-35s it needs to achieve dominance over its own airspace? The answer to that question is complex, manifold, and ultimately out of Zelensky's hands. But perhaps the most pertinent factor to consider is how much one of these miracle fighter jets actually costs. Well, if you were shopping for just a single F-35 Lightning II, it would set you back around the $109 million mark. But you would get plenty of choice and bang for your buck, There are 3 options with different operating abilities available: conventional takeoff and landing F-35A, short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B, and a variant designed for aircraft carrier operations F-35C. But of course, there is so much more to fighter jet deployment than just the cost of one aircraft. According to Simply Flying, the overall project cost of the F-35 program has increased from an initial $200 billion to over $400 billion, with an estimated lifetime cost of $1.7 trillion. And this perhaps brings us to the crux of the issue. Since the invasion in February 2022, Ukraine has received huge military aid packages from the West. According to a CNN report, that figure is around $350 billion. According to stats from the New York Times, the European Union collectively has provided about $148.5 billion in assistance since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Crazy, mind-boggling numbers. But even with the best will in the world and the greatest of intentions, financial support of that kind can't go on forever. No matter how big or powerful a nation or collective of nations, their coffers are not a bottomless pit. Hence the wrangling in the US Congress we touched upon at the top of the video. So that very much leaves Ukraine's Western allies with a risk and reward scenario to weigh up. Go all in with Zelensky and supply him with F-35s, or supply less effective hardware and watch the conflict drag on. Encouragingly, they can look to the start of the conflict. Before a single shell was fired, Western officials predicted that Russia would enjoy the kind of air supremacy it enjoyed in the large-scale airstrikes in the Syrian war. But failure on the first day of the Russians to destroy the Ukrainian air defense facilities has hampered Moscow's invasion strategy, a senior Western intelligence official told The Times. In terms of numbers, it didn't make pretty reading for the Ukrainians. At the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine was believed to have around 120 combat-capable aircraft, mainly consisting of aging Soviet-era MiG-29s and Su-27s. To match Moscow's firepower, which is thought to be 5 to 6 times greater than Kyiv's, they needed up to 200 jets. Without a doubt, the battle for the skies has been one of the more curious and certainly most crucial subplots of the war. According to a CNN report from 2022, the Russian Air Force had a massive advantage in terms of overall hardware. To give you a more detailed breakdown, Russia's 1,391 aircraft to Ukraine's 132, complemented by 948 helicopters to Kyiv's 55, was capable of the kind of aerial dominance required to end Ukraine's resistance. But for whatever reason, botched Russian tactics being the most popular and persuasive explanation, it simply didn't happen. It's also worth noting that Russia's overall defense budget of $45.8 billion is almost 10 times that of its neighbor. There's more. Russia had roughly 300 military aircraft stationed around the borders of the country, but has used few in the invasion so far. Instead, Russia has used attack helicopters and some short-range fighters, but made very limited use of long-range attack aircraft and bombers. Why is a question that has beguiled many military experts. One reason may be that Russia is not confident they destroyed Ukraine's air defenses and are not confident they can send fighters overhead without losing them, said another senior military figure. Given the F-35's undoubted capabilities, coupled with its suitability for this kind of conflict, air dominance could perhaps be achieved in Ukraine with relative ease. So, are financial constraints the main thing working against Zelensky then? To answer that question, we need to look at the bigger picture. Logistically, supplying the Ukraine with fighter jets isn't the most straightforward of processes. Why? Training. It's believed that Ukraine has 50 pilots who could start training them on Western jets immediately. However, preparing them to fly warplanes takes time. Just as importantly, it removes them from current fighting duties. And with the fall of such a crucial and symbolically important city as Avdiivka, Zelensky would be very reluctant to withdraw experienced fighters from the front line. To address this issue, the British government has offered to train Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard aircraft. This comes with a depressing caveat, however, as it's clearly a longer-term option. Training pilots could take months or even years, especially considering the complexity of the modern fighter jet. But encouragingly, British officials think the training process could be ramped up for some of Ukraine's more seasoned pilots with years of experience flying Soviet-era jet planes. Not the greatest news for Zelensky, but not a disaster by any means. However, the training issue also rears its ugly head in terms of maintenance. To keep a jet like the F-35-2 airborne requires complex and specialized engineering, Dr. Jamie Scheer, formerly of NATO, told the BBC that fifth-generation fighter jets require extensive maintenance following almost every flight. Again, Ukraine just doesn't have the personnel on the ground with the kind of experience needed to keep their prospective F-35s in the air. Again, it's important to note that air superiority isn't just about the number of aircraft you have in the skies. It also involves a variety of factors such as tactics and support systems. Invariably, military operations are complex and dynamic, and it's impossible to predict the outcome of any engagement with certainty. Once again, you need experienced people on the ground coordinating your aerial attacks, not just maintaining your hardware. Essential considerations that will not have been overlooked by Zelensky's allies. When multi-million-dollar aircraft are involved, decisions need to be weighed carefully. But it must be stated, the F-35 isn't the only fighter jet in the world that could assist the Ukrainian war effort against the Russian aggressors. At the time of writing for this video, Ukraine is due to receive a significant shipment of F-16 fighters from the West in the spring. Yuri Anat, the spokesperson of the Airforce Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, estimated that the country needed between 100 and 200 jets to defend its airspace. According to a report in the New York Times from back in August of 2023, the Netherlands and Denmark joined the US in pledging to donate some jets to the Ukrainian cause, all of which prompted Zelensky to post on messaging app Telegram a breakthrough agreement. From today, there are already specifics. They will be in the Ukrainian sky, thank you. Even so, there are deeper divisions and retinence that have opened up since Putin's invasion. Not just in the United States, but throughout the Western world, there is an increasing sense of war weariness. Even those who passionately supported Zelensky during the first few months of the conflict look to have had a change of heart. Gradually, people have started to realize that the massive military aid packages that their governments are providing are doing nothing more than prolonging the conflict. Citizens are tired of turning on their televisions and seeing bombed-out shells of buildings and dead bodies piled up in the streets. A catch-22 situation, if ever there was one. If enough people think that doing the right thing is having the wrong outcome, it puts yet another obstacle in Zelensky's path. All of which begs the question, what next? Some experts have advocated a negotiated peace settlement. In a report obtained by Newsweek, there have been calls for the US to play a more significant role in facilitating the process. The paper, published by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, disputes the idea that diplomacy is entirely untenable. However, that claim does have a chilling caveat. The authors believe that the view that a negotiated end to the war in Ukraine is neither possible nor desirable is false. It's also extremely dangerous for Ukraine's future. The war is not trending toward a stable stalemate, but toward Ukraine's eventual collapse. But if the whispering coming out of Moscow, or more correctly, the bullish posturing Putin displayed in his interview with Tucker Carlson, are to be believed, any peace deal would be so heavily loaded in Russia's favor, Zelensky would never put pen to paper in a million years. A more likely scenario is continued hostilities and further loss of life, even if 2024 is more of a year of consolidation for both sides rather than all-out offensives. Who would be happier with that outcome is obvious. With the fall of Avdiivka and 20% of Ukrainian territory in his back pocket, Putin looks happy to play the long game. Wait and see what Zelensky and the West come up with next. The battle of air dominance was thought to be a key factor in the war itself, and while that hasn't quite happened as yet, there is no doubt that the introduction of a fighter jet like the F-35 would make Putin and his colleagues in the Kremlin very nervous indeed. Ultimately, such an aircraft could make all the difference in Ukraine's war with Russia. With its advanced electronic warfare and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance suite, it would give them the upper hand in the air and essential support for ground troops. In terms of aerial firepower, we've already talked about its 4 500-pound GBU-12 laser-guided bombs on its wings, the 2 GBU-12 in its internal weapons bay, and the AIM-9 air-to-air heat-seeking missile. And the ability to gather and distribute real-time battlefield information to friendly forces would enable troops to coordinate decisive offensives and counter-offensives far more effectively. But all of this must be tempered with a solid dose of military and economic reality. History teaches us that it's not always the biggest or best-equipped army that wins the war. The will and determination of the people embroiled in the conflict have often proven to be the determining factor. But as mentioned, perhaps the biggest conundrum facing the West is whether prolonging the war will not only be counterproductive to their collective goals, but come at too much of a cost in terms of human life. Granted, it is well within Biden's and all the other Western leaders' capabilities to supply Ukraine with enough F-35 jets to gain air dominance over Russia in a super quick time. But will it bring a swift end to the conflict? Now we're coming to the end of the video. It's time to ask you what you think about the current situation in Ukraine. Do you think the deployment of the F-35 Lightning II could help Ukraine deal a fatal blow to Russia? Would establishing air dominance be a crucial factor in the outcome of the war? And if that's the case, would it make sense for NATO, the US, and the rest of Zelensky's allies to act now in an attempt to put a swift end to the conflict? Or are you on the other side of the fence? Taking into account Biden's reluctance to supply Ukraine with fighter jets 2 years ago, is there any realistic chance of Ukraine being supplied with state-of-the-art military hardware now? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe for more military content and analysis from military experts. Russia's Su-57, Putin's first stealth fighter in service since December 2022, has been through a rollercoaster of development woes and skepticism. Yet despite its impressive tech, doubts remain about its true capabilities, especially its stealthiness. So what's the deal with its long road to completion, and can it really slip under the radar like it claims? Let's dive in. Tom Cruise is no stranger to impossible missions. For several decades, perhaps with a bit of assistance from the Hollywood special effects department, he has been fighting bad guys in fast-moving action sequences on sea, land, and in the air. In 1986, in the film Top Gun, he piloted a state-of-the-art, fourth-generation US F-14 Tomcat against fictional Russian MiG-28s. In 2022, he returned to the cockpit of the by-now out-of-date F-14 to dogfight against fifth-generation advanced Russian fighters. Cruise, in the guise of ace fighter pilot Pete Mitchell, manages to shoot down 2 enemy aircraft. He downs one of them the old-fashioned way, with a burst of cannon fire. Another member of his squadron manages to account for another one. In this second version of the film Top Gun, the plane the movie directors chose to represent the bad guys was a real aircraft, the Russian Su-57 single-seat multi-role stealth fighter. Since its original maiden flight back in 2010, this is a plane so rarely seen in the skies that it might almost be a fictional aircraft. Ironically, if Maverick and his buddies had shot down 3 Su-57s in real life, that would have probably accounted for the entire Russian serviceable fleet of stealth fighters. Joking aside, Russia's Su-57 fighter is Russia's first attempt to join a very exclusive club of nations, those that can boast a stealth fighter within their Air Force. Information is always a little bit hazy around Russian military equipment. We think the Su-57 officially became operational in December 2020. Until then, it was only China and the United States that had stealth fighters. The Su-57 has had a painful and protracted birthing process that has spanned decades, cost billions of rubles, and seen 2 of the aircraft written off in accidents before it was operational. It may have been used in combat against Ukraine in the last couple of years, but we only have the claims of the Kremlin and little in the way of independent confirmation. But the Su-57 certainly seems to be a high-tech and capable aircraft, and Western analysts have been taking a keen interest in its development. So why has it taken so long to develop? And is it any good? And perhaps more to the point, is it stealthy? Before we get to that, let's start with what seemed to be a promising origin story. Founded by Pavel Sukhoi in 1939, the Sukhoi Design Bureau has developed a long and proud tradition of producing combat aircraft in the service of first the Soviet Union and then Russia. Sukhoi produced fighter and ground attack aircraft during the Second World War. From 1945 onwards, the company embraced the new challenges in technologies offered by the arrival of the jet engine, producing fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance aircraft. Sukhoi also branched out into civilian aircraft. In 2006, the Russian government merged several aircraft companies into the United Aircraft Corporation. Sukhoi was part of this merger, alongside Mikoyan, Tupolev, Ilyushin, and several other legendary Russian aircraft designers and manufacturers. And thus the development of the Su-57 began. Here's how it went down. Almost as soon as a new piece of high-technology military equipment comes into service, designers and planners are already looking ahead and thinking about its replacement. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union was looking ahead for the next generation of combat aircraft to provide the fighters of the 1990s and beyond. The concept was to have an aircraft capable of a range of tasks, able to attack targets in the air, on the land, and at sea. Experimental projects were initiated, and some fell by the wayside amid cost increases and program delays. One fighter prototype only took to the air in 2000 and was, at that point, 9 years behind schedule. the Russian Defense Ministry started afresh and in 1999 released a new set of requirements for a fighter aircraft that could, for cost reasons, replace both the MiG-29 and the Su-27, both sizable fleets of aircraft. It was intended that the aircraft should be smaller than its predecessors as well, to fit in with limited budgets. The Sukhoi development team took part in the invitation to submit proposals. It came down to a competition between Sukhoi and MiG. In April 2002, Sukhoi was selected and invited to produce prototypes, with an intended flying trial date somewhere in 2007. At the time, the aircraft design had a prototype name of the T-50. Sukhoi themselves are speculated to have used the American F-22 Raptor as a baseline guide for their design of a stealth fighter. The Sukhoi aspiration was for a family of stealth aircraft to emerge out of the Su-57 design work. Because much of the technology was very new, as the design of the aircraft proceeded, other aircraft were used as testbeds for aspects of the T-50, such as the weapons bays, engines, and flight control systems. Sukhoi made use of their own Su-27 multi-role fighter for this, and even retained some of these innovations on the Su-27 to make an upgraded Su-27. This proved so successful that the Russian Defense Ministry bought this new Su-27 version and renamed it the Su-35. The Su-35 is actually quite similar to the Su-57, apart from the stealth aspect, which the Su-57 reportedly has and the Su-35 does not. The project started to come together. The basic design was approved in 2004, and this triggered the release of more Defense Ministry funding into the project. In August 2007, the Russian Air Force announced the development was complete and that trials would soon be starting. The Soviet Union and Russia have marketed their military hardware all over the world. A fifth-generation stealth fighter aircraft would be no exception. Getting a large overseas order early on would take the financial pressures of the Su-57 project. India had bought much Russian military equipment in the past, and expressed very strong interest in acquiring the Su-57. There was talk of potential sales of 200 or 300 aircraft. A deal was signed between Russia and India in 2010. But this is where cracks literally started to emerge in the program. A dozen flying and non-flying prototypes had been produced. Although flight testing and the maiden flight were due to begin in 2007, the flights were delayed. There were problems with the engines, flying trials were pushed back to 2010, and when they did take place, it soon became apparent that the airframe structure had significant problems. Stress cracks were appearing after only a few flights. The Sukhoi designers scrambled to find solutions and had to implement some major design adjustments in order to reinforce the basic aircraft structure. In June 2014, one of the prototypes caught fire just after landing. Although the pilot escaped unharmed, the aircraft was written off. Some of the parts and components were cannibalized for use with the other prototypes. The original plan had been to start delivering production versions of the Su-57 from 2015. This clearly was not going to happen. The delivery date slipped to 2020. During these unforeseen difficulties, the Russian government began to reassess and reduce its purchasing plans for the aircraft. The Russian Defense Ministry would buy 52 Su-57s by 2020 and then another 150 by 2025. But the program remained troubled, as purchasing plans and delivery dates all fluctuated. After Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and the subsequent low-intensity conflict in eastern Ukraine fought by Russian-backed separatists and covert Russian forces, international sanctions began to impact on Russian finances. The Russian defense industry relied on importing high-tech Western electronics and other equipment. These important components became harder to access on the open market. Sanctions were to become even tougher when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. India started to back away from the big purchase order of Su-57s and in 2018 cancelled the deal completely. Large-scale production of what was a very expensive aircraft was now looking very doubtful. But in 2019, Russian President Vladimir Putin jumped in to tip the scales, perhaps even with his eye on a coming war with Ukraine. In May, the Kremlin released a statement that 76 Su-57s would be bought and would be delivered by 2028, but production of the aircraft remained slow. Reportedly, one was made in December 2020, and another 4 had emerged by the middle of 2022. Despite the problems, the aircraft had now flown publicly at airshows, and analysts had been able to take a look. The aircraft was light, maneuverable, and agile. Commentators were impressed. Marketing brochures and Kremlin official statements hyped up the capabilities, not least the fact that it was a stealth aircraft with long-range strike capability. But good intelligence analysts try not to take anything for granted. If it could do everything that the brochure advertised, the Su-57 would represent a very credible opponent for current US and NATO frontline fighter aircraft, such as the Eurofighter Typhoon, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-35 Lightning. But one former US pilot wryly observed, "Is it a current threat? Well, not now, because there is only one of them." Another ex-pilot observing the smooth takeoff and acrobatics of an Su-57 at an airshow was impressed but slightly dismissive of the fancy aerial display designed primarily to please the tourists. He was more interested in how the aircraft would perform with a full load of fuel and a heavy payload of weapons. Despite Putin's apparent faith in the aircraft, on December 24, 2019, the first official production-grade aircraft crashed while being delivered to an airbase. The pilot ejected and survived. The cause is unclear, but is believed to have been some form of control system malfunction. So what sort of capabilities have been advertised for the Su-57? The aircraft stats look impressive, reporting a speed of Mach 2 to 2.1 and a ceiling of 20,000 meters. A high fuel carrying capacity appears to give it a much longer range, 1,500 kilometers, just under 1,000 miles, than its Su-27 counterpart. It also has the option to fit an extendable refueling probe to further increase the range. Later production models are intended to receive a newly designed engine, the Isdalai 30, to deliver more power and performance. The Su-57 is capable of supercruise, maintaining flight speeds beyond Mach 1 without having to use high-fuel expensive afterburners. The Su-57 has 6 radars to enhance pilot situational awareness. The N-036 Bielka radar has a range of 400 kilometers. The F-16, about to be received by Ukraine, only has a range of 300 kilometers. It can carry many different permutations of weapon types, missiles, cruise missiles, and bombs, enabling it to strike at ground, sea, and air targets. A GSH 30mm automatic cannon provides a small anti-air or air-to-ground attack capability. Apparently, hypersonic missiles are being designed with the Su-57 in mind. The infrared search and tracking system can handle multiple targets. But let's spend a little bit of time thinking about the main selling point for the Su-57, its stealth capability. Inevitably, these specialist skills are closely guarded state secrets, but we can make a few observations. A stealth aircraft is simply an aircraft that has been designed to make it harder for radar to hit the aircraft and bounce back to the radar receiver and produce a ping or a blip on the radar screen. This can be achieved with several careful shaping features to the plane's outline. The Su-57 aircraft has incorporated many measures indicative of stealth capability. The wing and control surfaces are carefully shaped and angled. For stealth missions, the weapons are carried in 4 internal weapons bays, rather than hanging off the outside of the aircraft, which would make the aircraft more radar visible. Large parts of the aircraft surface are treated with radar-absorbing material, RAM. A key search and track sensor faces backwards when not in use, with the forward edge treated with RAM. The pilot canopy has been prepared with a metal oxide coating to reduce the radar profile. Extra care has been paid to every aspect of the assembly of the aircraft. Every rivet has to be flush with the fuselage or otherwise concealed. When assessing an aircraft's stealth capability, the experts talk of a radar cross-section. They mean what aircraft profile is visible to a radar system. By one estimate, the Su-57's radar cross-section, or RCS, is 30 times smaller than that of the Su-27. But some Western analysts suggest that although the frontal radar cross-section may be reasonably effective, the profile from the rear looks to be less well concealed. This would mean that it's probably harder to pick up on the radar if it's coming straight at you, but it might be more visible from the side or the rear. A crucial selling point for military hardware is whether you can point to a credible track record of military success. The Su-57 does not have this. Or does it? It's actually quite difficult to give a definitive answer. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed that the Su-57 has been used in action in Syria and in Ukraine. This is hard to verify, but let's take a look at what we do know. Our journey begins in Syria. In late February of 2018, 2 Su-57s reportedly landed at the Khmeimim military airbase on Syria's Mediterranean coastline. Khmeimim is directly adjacent to the Bashar al-Assad International Airport and, since 2015, has been effectively handed over to the Russians as part of their military operation in support of the Assad regime. It's well defended by Russian military personnel and air defense systems, and is a key logistics and accommodation node for Russian forces. The base has come under attack from shelling and drones in 2018. The Su-57s came accompanied by other aircraft, including Su-25s and 35s. Depending on the route taken, this could have been a flight of 1,000 kilometers or so, providing a good flight trial in its own right. It's possible that another couple of Su-57s also arrived at Khmeimim a few days later. What the Su-57s did there is unclear. It may simply have been a public relations exercise to demonstrate Russian capabilities and global reach. The aircraft were only there for a few days. After they departed, the Russian government made reference in March to Su-57 combat trials in Syria and claimed on 25th of May that an Su-57 had fired a cruise missile in combat. Later that year, the Russian Defense Ministry released footage of the Su-57s in flight and stated that 10 flights had taken place. It seems highly likely that the Su-57s dipped their toes into the Syrian conflict, but overall, this looks more like a PR stunt than a serious military deployment. Okay, but what about Ukraine? Russian claims that the Su-57 has been active during the invasion of Ukraine have been more persistent, but equally difficult to prove. Although it might seem a bit of a no-brainer that the Russian military would want to use their best aircraft in a large-scale war on their border, using the Su-57 over Ukraine would be fraught with military and reputational dangers. According to estimates, there are perhaps 10 to 15 Su-57 aircraft in total. It's fair to assume that not all of these would be operationally ready at any one point in time. This amounts to a very small potential strike force, and one that could not realistically afford to lose more than 1 or 2 in combat. Multiple Russian sources started claiming that the Su-57 was used in action during the war, from 2 or 3 weeks after the start of the invasion. On 22nd of June 2022, Russian state media referred to the Su-57 combat operations in relation to Ukraine. On the 5th of November 2023, Russian media claimed that the Su-57s had been active over Luhansk, a region of Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine. Perhaps more credibly, the British Ministry of Defence Intelligence Group have assessed that the Su-57 has almost certainly been used in the war. Okay, so what could this mean? The Russian Air Force has suffered catastrophic losses during its invasion of Ukraine. According to plausible estimates, well over 300 aircraft from a Russian Air Force operational strength pre-war of around 900 aircraft. The Ukrainian air defense system has greatly improved during the conflict and now presents a very effective shield against Russian aerial encroachment. This looks likely to have caused the Russian Air Force to limit the amount of aircraft it risks to actually fly over Ukrainian territory. It is likely that US and NATO intelligence-gathering aircraft operating over NATO or international airspace in Eastern Europe are scooping up as much information as possible regarding Russian air deployment activities and operations and relaying this to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. Many Russian air attacks are now conducted from Russian aircraft firing long-range missiles from Russian airspace. But even this does not make them entirely safe. Ukrainian air defense weapons include the Patriot, which has a range of 50 to 100 miles. Drones and other missiles also put Russian aircraft at risk on their bases inside Russia. So it's likely that Russia is remaining highly cautious with the Su-57 over Ukraine, not wishing to overplay their hand and expose it to undue risk. From what we've seen so far, the Su-57 is being used to undertake just enough aerial activity to be able to claim operational experience, but not enough to use it in a serious way that might knock out key Ukrainian military targets by using its stealth capability. If an Su-57 crashed in Ukraine, it would be a major propaganda blow for Russia and potentially a rich source of technological and tactical intelligence information made available to the Ukrainians and their Western allies. The views from the Ukrainian military suggest they certainly do not rule out the possibility that the Su-57 has been deployed in some way. One Ukrainian colonel observed that it's hard to identify specific aircraft types from the radar screen. The Su-25 and Su-35 can conduct similar non-stealth attacks with a similar profile. The colonel may know a little more than he's letting on. Perhaps the only real proof that a Russian stealth fighter was operating over Ukraine would be if a Ukrainian ground target suddenly exploded and the Ukrainians were at a complete loss to explain who had done it. That would be the perfect demonstration of a stealth attack. Conversely, however, if a Russian stealth attack was seen on the radar and easily intercepted, the Su-57's credibility would be instantly blown. So the question is, does Mr. Putin feel lucky? One thing's for sure, it's been a troubled path for Sukhoi's 5th-generation stealth fighter, and unfortunately for Russia's Su-57 program, it looks to be having very similar problems to the Russian T-14 next-generation main battle tank program, which we covered in one of our previous episodes. Both projects have struggled with design issues, have little to show for several decades of effort, and are now struggling with funding, technology, and a lack of crucial overseas sales. There are very few, only handfuls really, of the equipment known to be in existence, and no convincing demonstrations that either the aircraft or the tank are operationally ready in any meaningful sense. But work is still ongoing. Sukhoi is developing an Su-57 upgrade, known as the Su-57M. Flight trials of the Su-57M reportedly took place in 2022. There has been talk of a smaller naval version capable of landing on an aircraft carrier, but Russia does not have a viable carrier force at present. Perhaps of more immediate interest, in July 2021 there was reporting that a two-seater variant of the Su-57 was being built. This was described as a training version, but also something that might provide for a weapons officer to operate unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. Drone technology is causing something of a revolution in military affairs, due in large part to the innovations emerging from the Ukrainian battlefield. This is definitely something to keep an eye on. There is little concrete evidence that the international arms community have been wowed by the arrival of the Su-57. Although international sanctions are unlikely to shut down the Su-57 program, lack of critical technology, funds, and buyers will likely continue to restrict the forward progress of the Su-57 project. Potential sales opportunities still look limited. Brazil dropped out in 2013, preferring to buy the Swedish Gripen and build it in Brazilian factories. India cancelled its deal with Russia over 5 years ago and is looking to build its own homegrown stealth fighter. Turkey was briefly interested. In 2019, an Su-57 turned up at a Turkish technology display in Istanbul, but announced in early 2020 that it too was now planning to build a homegrown stealth fighter. Algeria may receive some in a few years' time, and Iraq has expressed interest, but they will probably be watching Ukraine closely for evidence of the much-promoted stealth capability. But not all technological innovations leap straight from the drawing board and into a fully functioning and successful piece of equipment. We suggest that it would be too simplistic to write off the Su-57. It is a light, powerful, and agile aircraft with significant capabilities beyond other current Russian combat aircraft. And some of the new design and technological features that emerged from Sukhoi's extensive development efforts seem to have cascaded down to the benefit of other Russian fighter systems. So perhaps we need to wait and see what happens later this year. F-16 fighters have been offered to the Ukrainian Air Force by Denmark and Norway. These will replace the aging Ukrainian MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters. Ukrainian pilots are already being trained on F-16s, and we may well see them take to the skies over Ukraine even as soon as this summer. But what do you think? Is it possible the Russian Air Force is holding back its small Su-57 fleet in anticipation of a conflict with American aircraft technology? This would suddenly take us beyond a Hollywood movie and into a real contest between American 4th-generation aircraft and Russian 5th-generation. Is this likely to happen? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. There has yet to be an aerial confrontation between two 5th-generation fighter jets, but tensions in Eastern Europe have now put them in the same arena, if not the same ring. Fighting out of NATO's corner is the F-35 Lightning II. Fighting out of Russia is the Su-57 Felon. If this fight became a reality, which one of these planes would win? First, let's take a look at the tail of the tape. The F-35 saw its genesis in the year 2001, when it was announced as the winner of the Joint Strike Fighter program, which began in the 1980s. The Lightning II is a multi-role fighter with several variants. The F-35A, conventional takeoff and landing plane, the F-35B, short takeoff and vertical landing plane, and the F-35C, carrier-based plane. The F-35A entered service in 2016, the F-35B in 2015, and the F-35C in 2019. It is a single-seat plane equipped with the Pratt & Whitney F135 PW100 turbofan engine. It has a top speed of Mach 1.6, about 1,200 miles per hour, and a range of 1,700 miles per flight without refueling, a combat radius of 770 miles, and a service ceiling over 50,000 feet. The F-35 can climb at a rate of 45,000 feet per minute. Its payload includes all of the air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles in service and some of the bombs in the American arsenal. Normally, the plane can carry 4 missiles between its 2 internal weapons bays. though the coming F-35 Block 4 upgrade will increase that capacity to 6. There are also 6 pylons, 3 on each wing, for the F-35 to carry additional munitions, although this would sacrifice the plane's stealth attributes. The F-35A comes with a 25mm gun and 182 rounds as a standard attribute. The F-35B and F-35C can, if need be, mount a 25mm gun on a pod. According to Lockheed Martin, the F-35's manufacturer, the Lightning II's maneuverability has improved significantly since the first batch of planes. Its turn rate is now superior to the 4th-generation fighters in the American air fleet such as the F-15 Eagle, F-16 Fighting Falcon, and the F/A-18 Super Hornet. The F-35 can perform attacks from all angles at either slow or high speeds and enter enemy turn circles rapidly. Meanwhile, the Su-57 Felon originated in the 1980s, as the Soviet Union wished to create a modern fighter jet to compete with the premier American fighters of the time, like the F-15 Eagle. The Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 disrupted the project, but did not put a halt to it. The current plane began as the PAK-FA, Future Frontline Aircraft System. The Kremlin planned for it to replace the MiG-29 and Su-27 while competing with the F-22 Raptor. The program began in 2001, with a prototype plane having its maiden flight in 2010. The first pre-production plane was delivered to the Russian Aerospace Forces in 2014. The Russians intended for the new aircraft to enter service in 2017 and reach full operational capacity in 2020. But it was not ready, despite the Russian brass ordering 76 of them in 2019. There are 22 of these planes in service as of December 2023. The Felon is a single-seat plane. It comes with twin Saturn AL41F1 turbofan engines capable of delivering 35,000 pounds of thrust individually, or about 64,000 pounds together. A twin-seat version of the aircraft may be on the way. The Su-57 has a purported top speed of Mach 2, or about 1,530 miles per hour. It has a service ceiling of 66,000 feet, a climb rate of 64,000 feet per minute, and a range of 2,186 miles without refueling. The Kremlin has not revealed any details about the plane's combat radius, although some aviation experts believe it's about 750 miles. The Felon can supposedly carry a higher payload than the F-35, with up to 7,500 kilograms, with 10 internal and 6 external holders for missiles and bombs. There is also a 30mm gun for dogfighting. To further assist it in close-quarters combat, the Felon's engines have a 3D thrust vectoring feature. This feature allows an Su-57's pilot to control the outflow of the plane's engines regardless of the aircraft's direction. In other words, the Su-57 might be flying in one direction, but the engine could be pointing in a different direction. This feature could be particularly useful in a dogfight, as it would allow the Felon to outmaneuver its opponent. The F-35 does not have 3D thrust vectoring. At first glance, the tail of the tape would seem to favor the Su-57 in a traditional match. The Felon has a higher maximum speed, climb rate, and altitude, can carry more weapons, has a longer range, and has 3D thrust vectoring engines to give it an edge in a visual range dogfight. If both planes wound up detecting each other, the advantage should swing to the Russian plane. This reality would be in line with the design of the two fighters. The F-35 is a multi-role plane, while the Su-57 is far more dedicated to air superiority, although it can adapt to other roles like attacking ground targets. However, dogfights are rare in modern warfare. While it would be premature to call them extinct, American military planners believed such a thing in the early 1960s, and those beliefs turned disastrous in the skies over Vietnam. The advent of stealth technology, longer-range missiles, and more sensitive radar means that visual-range plane battles will continue to become less frequent. Greater situational awareness, early detection, and ability to kill from long range are and will increasingly be the most important parts of establishing air superiority. In other words, spot the enemy and shoot him down from long range before he can spot you and do the same. The F-35 has its strengths in precisely these areas. The Lightning II is a true stealth aircraft. Aside from being coated in radar-absorbent materials, everything about the plane's design is made for stealth, including its size. It's a relatively small plane, at 51.4 feet in length. 14.4 feet in height, a wingspan of 35 feet, and a wing area of 460 square feet. The face of the F-35's engine is concealed in a way to add further stealth. In all, the F-35 has a radar cross-section with the profile of a golf ball. The F-35 is even stealthier than the F-22, according to the USAF brass, and its radar-absorbent coating is more durable than the Raptors. Although the exact details are naturally classified, the F-22 can be detected at a range under 10 miles. The F-35 would therefore be even less detectable. Although it is also coated with radar-absorbent materials, the Su-57's design is much less stealthy than its American opponent, to the point that some aviation experts do not regard it as a true stealth plane or fifth-generation fighter aircraft. It is bigger than the Lightning II at 66 feet long and 15 feet high. Its wingspan is 46 feet with a wing area of 848 square feet. To be sure, the Su-57 has a much lower radar cross-section than the Russian fighter jets that preceded it. However, this stealth profile is mostly concentrated in the front of the plane. In contrast to the F-22 and the even stealthier F-35, the Su-57 can be detected at a range of 35 miles. However, the Su-57 might be even less stealthy than this, and we'll discuss those allegations at the end of the video. If the stealth features of the Su-57 are as advertised, the fella might be able to compete with the Lightning II if the two planes are approaching each other directly. However, if it were to turn or maneuver, the Felon is much more detectable than the F-35. The Felon would therefore have to try and detect the incoming American plane and shoot it down without exposing its sides or rear. The two planes' missile armaments might be the deciding factor. For air-to-air combat, the F-35 can carry the AIM-9X Sidewinder for short-range engagements up to about 22 miles. The British AIM-132 ASRAAM is also compatible with the F-35 and can hit shorter-range targets about 15 miles away. For longer range, the Lightning II can carry the AIM-120 AMRAAM to hit targets about 65 miles away. In the future, the Block 4 F-35B variants will have the capability to be armed with the European MBDA Meteor, which can hit targets about 125 miles away, though this capacity is not expected until 2027. The F-35 will also soon be armed with the hypersonic AIM-260 JATM, which can hit targets about 120 miles away. The new missile will be integrated into the F-35's potential armaments as it starts to enter service. The Su-57 can also be armed with a panoply of air-to-air missiles at different ranges. First, there is the R-73 for shorter distances up to 25 miles. For medium to longer range combat, the Su-57 can carry the R-77M, which can hit targets up to a range of 120 miles. Then there is the hypersonic R-37, which can hit targets at about the same distance with speeds of Mach 6. In a direct confrontation, the Su-57 would have more shots and have a greater reach than the current F-35, although that advantage would be lost once the Lightning II gets the AIM-260 and the MBDA Meteor. So far, things don't seem to be that promising for the F-35. However, to make use of its greater ammunition and range, the Su-57 must first detect its target F-35 before it gets detected itself. As we have seen in the two planes' particular stealth configurations, this might prove difficult for the Russian fighter to do. From what we do know, the F-35 would usually have the advantage of early detection. The F-35 is the world's most sophisticated sensory aircraft. A few aviation experts have likened it to a supercomputer in the sky. The F-35 comes equipped with the AN/APG-81 Active Electronically Scanned Array (AESA) radar system. The range of the AN/APG-81 is, as you would expect, a highly guarded secret, but some aviation experts think it can spot targets between 250 and 300 miles away. The AN/APG-81 can provide high-resolution ground mapping to the F-35's pilot. The Lightning II also comes equipped with a network of cameras at various points on the plane to give the pilot a 360-degree field of view, with the information being fed directly into the helmet. These capabilities will be increased even further with the coming F-35 Block 4 upgrades. The F-35's sensors also include the Advanced Electro-Optical Targeting System and a custom-made AN/ASQ-239 Barracuda electronic warfare system. developed by BAE Systems. The Barracuda provides both offensive and defensive electronic warfare support, which provides all-aspect broadband protection to suppress enemy radar systems and assist the F-35 in targeting valuable assets. For example, the Barracuda Electronic Warfare Suite can turn the F-35 into a stand-in electronic warfare attack platform, without needing to call upon a specialized plane. In this capacity, an F-35 approaching an enemy air defense system could attempt to jam it with its onboard electronic warfare suite. The Barracuda system is also an open architecture one, designed to allow for the addition of new capabilities as they become available. Current F-35s can track 23 enemy planes in 9 seconds and engage 19 in under 3 seconds. The Su-57 also comes equipped with its own AESA radar system, the NO-36 Bielka. This radar provides X and L band modes to make it more resistant to enemy electronic warfare countermeasures. The radar provides a 120-degree field of view in elevation and azimuth, the angle between a reference plane and a point. This is the highest possible number for a flat phase array antenna. Though the radar's range is also naturally a secret, some estimates suggest that the NO-36 Bielka can detect an 11-square-foot target at a range of roughly 250 miles. The radar system is spread across the felon's body. The Su-57 also comes packed with equipment to give it improved situational awareness. This equipment includes cameras interspersed throughout the plane to give the pilot the information. At first glance, the two planes seem roughly comparable in their radars and electronic warfare abilities. But the F-35 should have longer-range detection now and a reduced cross-section. In the short future, the F-35's advantage in this area will grow, as the Block 4 version of the Lightning II will come with a new radar, the AN/APG-85, produced by Northrop Grumman. While the details are of course another secret, the new radar will have an even longer range than its predecessor. It will also have higher resolution, superior tracking, and better electronic warfare capabilities such as jamming and degrading enemy radars. The new radar will have these superior features in part thanks to it being based on a gallium nitride semiconductor system. This same technology is also being designed for the United States Air Force's coming 6th-generation fighter jet, the Next Generation Air Dominance (NGAD) program, giving the F-35 some features of a 6th-generation plane. The current F-35 versus the advertised features of the Su-57 should make for a close contest. Both have similar range, although the F-35's radar has a slightly longer range. Their missiles have similar range too, although the Russian R-37 is faster. The coming Block 4 F-35, combined with the AIM-260 JATM, should give the Lightning II a decided advantage over the Felon at longer distances. The design specifications between the two planes suggest that the F-35 should be able to detect the Felon from further away and shoot it before it can in turn be detected. The F-35 also carries another advantage, sensor fusion, which would prove a significant advantage in any real-world meeting between the two jets. The Su-57 has sensor fusion capabilities of its own. It can link up with Russian assets in the air and on the ground and share its data. However, the F-35's sensor fusion capability is unparalleled. The Lightning II's sensor fusion capabilities can generate real-time pictures of the battlefield and feed it to friendly forces, enabling a combined arms approach to tactical situations through information integration. The Block 4 F-35 will have even greater sensor fusion capabilities. The coming capability will create something that the American military brass calls kill webs, integrating an all-domain approach to target selection and striking. For example, in a scenario involving a meeting between the F-35 and Su-57, the former would be able to more easily relay targeting information to a friendly aircraft or a nearby air defense system that might be in a better position to shoot the incoming Russian plane down. In addition to adding to the F-35's network capabilities, the kill web ability will help the Lightning II to maintain its stealth profile, since it would not need to open its weapons bay to shoot down the incoming Russian aircraft. For a plane that already had a stealth advantage, the kill web would greatly add to its ability to detect and shoot down the Su-57 before it detects the F-35. As we've seen in a direct fight between the two planes, a first look, first kill ability for the F-35 is its key to victory. The Lightning II is not a plane that was engineered to take part in close-quarters combat like the Su-57. Its purpose is not air superiority, but to be a jack-of-all-trades force multiplier. If the Su-57 can detect its American enemy, it should have the advantage. However, since the Su-57 is more visible to radar than the F-35, in long-range combat scenarios, the Lightning II should be better able to shoot down its Russian rival, particularly once the AIM-260 JATM becomes available in large numbers. That process is expected to begin in 2024 and will be completed by the end of the decade. The advent of kill webs will add to the F-35's advantages at long range. Perhaps that is no longer a one-on-one fight, but in any real wartime scenario, both of these planes will serve as one component in a much bigger framework. A real confrontation between these two fighters would not involve a one-on-one fight, but as part of a network, and this would be where the Su-57 would find itself at its most pronounced disadvantage. The Russian aerospace forces have been hesitant to deploy their newest toy in the skies of Ukraine. For all its capabilities, the Kremlin does not appear to be too confident about the new plane's ability to hide from enemy planes and air defense systems. Most war watchers have observed that the Russian brass is afraid to lose the Su-57 Felon. As we mentioned, only 22 of them are in service as of the end of 2023. Production delays and international sanctions may prevent the Russian military from acquiring the initial batch of 76 that it ordered in 2019. Meanwhile, over 1,000 F-35 Lightning II planes have been built as of January 2024. The United States alone plans to buy a total of 2,457 F-35 aircraft. In any scenario involving hostilities in Eastern Europe, the Su-57 would be significantly outnumbered. The Felon's flaws might go deeper than its production problems. Chris Bolton, an aviation expert, noted on his Twitter feed in June 2022 that the Russian plane has a much larger radar cross-section than commonly reported. According to him, the Su-57 has a radar cross-section similar to the fourth-generation Fa-18 Super Hornet, making it 1,000 times less stealthy than the F-35. Experts have commonly mentioned that the Su-57 is by far the least stealthy of the 4 fifth-generation aircraft currently in the world's skies, a roster that also includes the F-22 Raptor and China's Chengdu J-20. Such a lack of stealth profile might explain why the Kremlin has been so hesitant to deploy it over Ukraine's battlefields and has so far only used it in a long-range support role from Russian airspace. If this is true, the Su-57 would be at a much more pronounced disadvantage against the F-35 than commonly believed. And it's for this reason why many aviation experts do not consider the Felon a true fifth-generation fighter, but rather an advanced fourth-generation plane. Despite numerous doubts, the Su-57 boasts some impressive features. In a traditional plane-versus-plane fight at visual range, it would likely beat the F-35. The F-35 would also need to be careful about its shot placement, because in a fight with the Su-57 Felon, it would not be able to carry external weapons and expect to survive, because doing so would give up its stealth advantage. However, the F-35 is far more capable to meet the demands of the modern battlefield, and it will only get more capable over the coming years. It is arguable that the Kremlin built a plane to fight the last war. So although it is a capable aircraft, it might not be capable enough to stand up to its true fifth-generation rivals like the F-35. The Kremlin has stated that the current Su-57 will not be the final version, with the Russian brass even claiming that upgrades could make the Felon the first sixth-generation fighter flying the world's skies, ahead of even the NGAD. Safe to say, most aviation experts are very skeptical about these claims. In most practical, real-world fights between the two planes, it would likely be smarter to put your money on the F-35 under most conditions. But do you agree? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more military analysis from military experts.